You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Christopher Media, let's make some noise.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Now, the Warriors, Clint Eastwood is the star, Telly Savalas is the other star. I'm getting star billing, but I'm not in it. I have the part of Crap Game. He plays Kelly, and Telly Savalas plays Big Joe, which I think is an original name for a soldier.
Kelly! What the hell are you doing here?
Looking after the colonel, that's what.
Shoot him and let's get the hell out of here.
Shoot him, we don't get the gold.
What gold?
Proposition. Like you might be interested in helping me out. Oh. I want you to set up a barrage for me.
Yeah. If you whisper one word about the gold to these guys, I'm gonna have you bounce from this outfit so fast your feet won't even touch the ground.
Okay, Kelly. What is it? I want the intelligence reports for this whole sector, and I need them in the next 2 hours.
That's nice. What's in it for me?
It's behind enemy lines.
I got 3 Shermans outside.
His name's Oddball.
A Sherman can give you a very nice edge. These are my boys. It's still up. No, it ain't.
Look, baby, I'm kind of hung up. I need about 60 feet of bridge.
Listen, kid, they haven't got your back in the nut ward again, have they?
I don't need you. 60 feet of bridge I can pick up almost anywhere. Schmuck.
All right. I need at least 100 guys. Where do I find 100 men just like that?
Loud ball better show up, Kelly.
Come on, let's move it on.
But my hair is still in curls.
Oh, sure. Get out. Rupture yet with this thing.
Hey, nobody said anything about schlepping his 30 caliber machine gun all over the country.
I'll make it $50 if you carry the machine gun, huh?
Fire! Fire! I thought you said 3 Shermans. Those nuts have brought half the army with them.
What is this? Hey, what is this, a ball game? Who are these guys?
My friends, okay?
And who's that bunch of refugees over there?
The band.
The band? What do we need a band for?
Oh, little paint shop, man. They're beautiful people.
You see, we're just a private enterprise operation.
Those freaks! That ain't an army, it's a circus.
It could be the perfect crime.
Welcome to the Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Samm Deighan.
I'm just drinking wine and eating cheese and catching some rays.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Bill Ackerman.
Hey, glad to be back.
On this episode, we are looking at Brian G. Hutton's Kelly's Heroes. Released in 1970, the film stars a bevy of amazing actors, including Clint Eastwood as the titular Kelly. Set in World War II, when Kelly catches wind of a cache of Nazi gold, he hatches a scheme to get it. Unfortunately, it is deep behind enemy lines. We will be spoiling this film as we go along, so if you haven't seen Kelly's Heroes, please stop the podcast and go track it down. We will still be here when you return. So, Bill, when was the first time you saw Kelly's Heroes, and what did you think?
I came to this one rather late. I only saw this a few months ago. I saw it around the holidays. It was a film I was aware of, but just caught up with it recently. I think I was expecting it to be more of a traditional men on a mission war movie, like a Clint Eastwood leading a group of soldiers, like a Dirty Harry Dozen kind of thing, I guess.
Whoa,
but like,
nice.
I think I was surprised at how much of a comedy it actually was, and I was really struck by how much it tried to play to the counterculture type anti-war generation of the time, as much as the silent majority audience that I assumed is the audience that has kind of kept it in circulation all these years. But I did like it, while maybe being surprised at how odd it was.
How about you, Sam?
This is one of those movies that has just sort of been around forever for me, because as a kid, it was on TV a lot and I watched it. I think it probably took me a while to see it all the way through, but I watched it because, embarrassingly enough, my first crush was Telly Savalas.
Who loves you, baby? I do.
I've never really liked conventional war films. And so this is something that I was drawn to for a lot of those reasons that Bill just said, that it's such a weird war movie. Like, it's not at all a straightforward heroic type story, and it has so many great actors giving these really quirky performances. But at the same time, I think it has a lot of issues, and it also suffered from comparisons. Like, I don't think it really holds up to something like MASH or even something like Where Eagles Dare, but is sort of this fun little curio in its own right.
Yeah, this one feels like it was kind of wallpaper when I was growing up. It's like one of those movies that you would see on like a UHF channel playing on a Saturday afternoon. This movie feels like it was made for our dads. It's funny, it's got adventure, it's got some very well-known faces. There's nothing that's offensive if we put this on Saturday afternoon and just let it roll. The kids can watch it, the wife can watch it, but really it feels like this is a dad movie. And it took me so long to finally catch up with this one. I know for sure I'd seen bits and pieces over the years, and then I don't even remember what the impetus was, but sat down and watched it a few years ago, and it just, I can't say it blew me away, but certain aspects of it blew me away. I'll be honest, Donald Sutherland blew me away. And
yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a strange film telling a Vietnam story set in World War II. So like Oddball, the character that Sutherland plays, is completely out of time. Feels like he just escaped from the commune, rather than he's the guy who's leading this tank battalion. I mean, his character in Dirty Dozen was much more of a straight shooter, even though he was in jail for reasons. But yeah, this is, it's wild to see just how strange of a film this is, I suppose.
One of the interesting things about it, you say that it's something that could be shown on daytime TV and it's not offensive at all, but it is also very much a product of its time, in the sense that you could never have made a movie like at least in terms of mainstream American cinema, you could never have made a movie like this in the 50s for two reasons. First, because it goes against that mainstream propaganda view that the United States definitely had, but that many other allied countries did as well, where you have to sort of present everything in black and white terms, where the Allied soldiers are heroic and the Nazis or the Axis soldiers are evil. And in this movie, it's like no one is heroic. And there's that really funny stuff with General Archie Bunker, who basically has all of that great dialogue towards the end where he talks about how he's never seen soldiers this motivated. And like, of course, we know that they're not motivated because they have some sort of moral stance, but it's because they want the damn gold. Because of the way it ends, where they wind up teaming up with the Nazis to get the gold out of the bank, that would, even though it's based on a true story, which I'm sure we'll talk more about later, that would have been super scandalous in the late 40s or 50s to suggest that Allied and Axis soldiers worked together on a bank heist.
I didn't get a chance to show this to you guys, but I found some ads from when Kelly's Heroes got re-released in the wake of All in the Family, and some of the ads had Clint Eastwood and Archie Bunker, not Carol O'Connor, but Archie Bunker as the co-star of this movie.
I mean, it's so hard to look at him and not see Archie Bunker.
I was struck by just how many World War II films were still being made at the height of the Vietnam War, and how they all seem to try to straddle the line to one extent or another in terms of like not alienating the 60s, baby boomer, like protest generation viewers, but like still, being proper war movies. Like you look at Patton or Catch-22, Castle Keep, MASH, I guess always gets grouped in there, even though it's Korea. Yeah. But like they all seem to be evoking either the service comedy or like some kind of, even if their motives are wrong, they're on the right side of history, so it still feels heroic, whether it's like Castle Keep, they're like defending a castle, or, in Kelly's Heroes, their motives are mercenary. It's money, but they're still killing Nazis. They're still kind of good guys. But I would think that like at the time of the Iraq War, there was like so many films being made that were all flops because nobody wanted to go see a movie about the Iraq War. It was on the news all the time. But I can't imagine a film like in that period trying to appeal to anti-war protesters as well as the people that wanted to see movie stars like killing terrorists.
It's crazy. If you think about the 70s in general, not just in the US, in Europe, there were like a wild number of World War II movies that all came out in like a 5-year period. Those movies aren't really about World War II. World War II is a stand-in to talk about current events, but it always winds up being this conveniently symbolic event or series of events that it's so easy to translate into novels and scripts where you have that kind of polarity between Allied and Axis forces that makes for such good film writing, or at least such easy film writing. And I don't think you have the same sort of thing with the wars to come afterwards, which are a lot murkier. But it is so crazy to me that this movie does try to appeal to both of those audiences that you just mentioned. And I feel like it might be the only movie that actually openly tries to do that.
We already talked a little bit about Carol O'Connor, who's this very out of touch General Colt, calling to mind a gun with his name. And that, he hears about Kelly and his band going behind enemy lines, and he just thinks they're the most gung-ho soldiers in the world. Meanwhile, their captain is, again, completely out of touch with things. And I didn't even notice until yesterday when I was rewatching it that the captain is there as Colt is going crazy and like listening to them talking on the radio. And it's like, sir, we don't know what they're talking about. They're using codes like crap game and bank heist and all this. And meanwhile, the captain of the group is there at the general's chateau and has this armload of presents because he said he was going to go pick up some gifts for the general. And he's just standing there with this armful of presents, not able to do much of anything other than just kind of like scooch himself in near the radio. And this whole thing of the captain finding a boat and wanting to move this boat from where they're at in, I guess, Germany or the right-hand side, the eastern front of France, and wants it transported to Paris. And there's even more of that, I think, in the script as far as like him finding this boat and wanting to move it over. And I should say it's a yacht. It's not a boat. So it's like he is plundering from the war. General Colt is definitely plundering from the war. He's living in splendor in the chateau. And yet all the grunts, Kelly, Big Joe, Little Joe, all of these guys, they're not getting anything, and it's like, okay, we're going to take ours now.
That is an angle of the war, really any war, but specifically World War II, that is the sort of thing that makes people uncomfortable even now to some degree, is to suggest that people were not fighting in the war because they had a particular moral conviction, but they were fighting in the war because they had no other choice. And were there basically trying to survive and trying to make life a little more bearable, a little more tolerable. So I think these sorts of more subversive kinds of mainstream narratives that suggest that, yeah, people are there maybe doing a good thing, fighting fascism, but they're also just regular people who aren't necessarily here because they signed up to be here, and so they're trying to make the best of a bad situation. And that's one of the things that I think this movie does so well as compared to something like Where Eagles Dare, where it's just like some normal guys who don't really understand why they're there. They understand why they're there, but they don't seem to really respect any of the leadership. And I love so much that 10 minutes into the movie, neither do we. So we get why everybody is so quick to kind of go along with Kelly, because they respect him. And he's also saying, all right, instead of just like sitting here in squalor and the cold rain and discomfort in France, let's actually do something and, not get killed, or at least have a reason for getting killed.
If you didn't have Kelly and you just had that group of characters, it would feel a lot more like, not necessarily like inmates in an asylum, but like the comedy of just the situation would probably be more apparent, because almost everyone else is more of a broadly comic character, I think, of that group of guys. And I think Kelly being almost more like a traditional war movie hero, except that he's got that maybe a little bit of the resonance with like the Leone Western kind of characters, where he is so motivated by looking out for himself that it's like superficially he's like the Where Eagles Dare kind of character, as like far as a an efficient killing machine kind of soldier, but his motives are even more shady in this one. But I was thinking about that with, looking at things like Castle Keep and Catch-22 and MASH also. It's like, it's people like being put in this like absurd situation, and all the comedy seems to come out of that.
You can't have Don Rickles show up and there not be comedy.
It'd be shocking if it was the other way. Yeah.
It would be shocking if Don Rickles had been cast as Kelly.
Yeah, I love Kelly's backstory, too. This whole thing of him basically refusing to fight, taking the blame for not capturing a hill, and so then it's like he got busted back down to private. So he really is a leader, and he's a really damn good leader, but his rank doesn't show that. And so I like when he and Telly Savalas, who's this Big Joe character, who's really, he's the one in charge. Like when the captain goes away, and they say at least one time, like, Captain never knows what we're doing anyway. Like, yes. What happens if he comes back to this little shithole that we're supposed to stay at and we're not here? And they're like, well, he probably thought that we got sent back to the front because he never knows what's happening. Then we have that tension between Big Joe and Kelly. And I'd say there are some funny bits of Savalas, but for the most part, I think Clint Eastwood is really playing the straight man to all of these other comic characters, and you need that straight man to be there, because then otherwise you're, good luck having 2 or 3 comic characters all in the same scene. Have Clint Eastwood acting goofy when he is talking with Oddball and Crap Game. I mean, that scene with the 3 of them is one of my favorites in the film.
$1.6 million. What else will you need?
You could probably use some armor.
What are you doing up there?
Hey, Crocker.
The hell's that?
His name's Oddball.
I got 3 Shermans outside.
Yeah, what outfit?
Right now, I don't have any outfit.
Who's your commanding officer?
He got decapitated by an 88 about 6 weeks ago. But I mean, don't say you're sorry. He's been trying to get us killed ever since we landed at Omaha Beach. It's terrible.
He hasn't reported him dead yet. You see, I've been collecting his whiskey.
We see our role as essentially defensive in nature. While our armies are advancing so fast and everyone's knocking themselves out to be heroes, we are holding ourselves in reserve. In case the Krauts mount a counteroffensive which threatens Paris or maybe even New York, then we can move in and stop them. But for $1.6 million, we could become heroes for 3 days.
You mentioned his backstory, and this is something I noticed this week while rewatching it, was the the whole notion of friendly fire as a recurring theme in the movie. And that's something that I don't know how much it was even really talked about in 1970, as far as like the non-battle deaths weren't being included in the weekly casualty lists that the public was receiving. And something like, was it like 35% of the deaths in the Vietnam War were friendly fire or non-combat kind of deaths. So it was like a serious issue that wasn't being talked about. There was a TV movie like at the end of the 70s about it, but I don't know that that was even like a mainstream issue then. But it's like a recurring theme throughout Kelly's Heroes, as far as the German soldier they kidnap, he is killed by, his own side, and like their jeeps are destroyed by friendly fire. Eastwood's character is disgraced by friendly fire. And it's not like they hit it over the head, but it is like something that, as much as the looting theme is like the other kind of recurring theme in this one.
It's not a theme that generally shows up in World War II movies, I think, because it was much less of an issue in that particular war. And much like you were just saying, I didn't really notice that or didn't pay attention to it as much in past viewings. But this time around, I felt like it's like every other scene. It's someone's accidentally getting shot by other American soldiers. Part of what makes that sense of absurdist comedy work so well is the idea of how, aside from Clint Eastwood's character, it kind of feels like all inmates in the asylum, is this sense that there's a total communication breakdown and nobody knows what the hell is going on. And the only character in the whole movie who is really able to organize communication is Kelly. I even love that line of dialogue from the general where right before he gets on the radio, he's screaming at his communications officer about how he's like, I have a communications officer who can't communicate. You're like a war censor.
And I think it's the communications officer that's supposed to be able to provide him with the aerial photographs. And then the next time you see those aerial photographs, they're all spread out and you've got Oddball looking at them. I'm surprised that Oddball's commander wasn't actually fragged by Oddball and his group, because I imagine he was a much more of a straight shooter than these guys, because Oddball and his crew are like a hippie band, just all hanging around.
Like a commune.
First time we see them, it is just amazing. Like a guy going around just pouring wine, and women just in kind of states of disrobement. And the only one that's actually doing any work is Moriarty, and that's probably why he's always in such a bad mood.
They really steal the film, and I don't know how many people listening to this will have seen Little Murders. It's this really great film, I think also from 1970 or 1971, where it's like every once in a while Donald Sutherland plays these like crazy hippie characters. Like he kind of does it as the teacher in Animal House. He also does it, he has this cameo in Little Murders where the film is basically about these two people in New York who are complete opposites. They seem to not like each other, but they wind up getting together romantically. And there's this wedding scene where Donald Sutherland plays this like chaplain or a minister or something. And he's just this like crazy hippie who doesn't believe in religion. He doesn't believe in anything. And he gives this like 10-minute monologue to marry them in their ceremony that just totally steals the film. And it's almost like a continuation of his character here.
There's often so much sham about this business of marriage. Everyone accepts it. Ritual. That's why I was so heartened when Alfred asked me to perform this ceremony. He has certain beliefs, which I assume you all know. He is an atheist, which is perfectly all right. Really it is. I happen not to be. But inasmuch as this ceremony connotes an abandonment of ritual in the search for truth, I agreed to perform it. First, let me state to you, Alfred, and to you, Patricia, that of the 200 marriages that I have performed, all but 7 have failed. So the odds are not good. We don't like to admit it, especially at the wedding ceremony, but it's in the back of all our minds, isn't it? How long will it last? We all think that, don't we? We don't like to bring it out in the open, but we all think that. Well, I say, why not bring it out in the open? Why does one decide to marry? Social pressure? Boredom? Loneliness? Sexual appeasement? Love? I won't put any of these reasons down. Each in its own way is adequate. Each is all right. Last year, I married a musician who wanted to get married in order to stop masturbating. Please don't be startled. I'm not putting him down. That marriage did not work. But the man tried. He is now separated, still masturbating, but he is at peace with himself because he tried society's way. So you see, it was not a mistake. It turned out all right.
His dialogue, it almost makes you feel bad for some of the other actors who have comedic roles because they just can't compete. Like, it sort of makes me think of those anecdotes from the Wild Bunch set where it's like everybody's constantly trying to one-up each other in their different scenes. But here it's Donald Sutherland. He just steals it.
Well, it's a railroad bridge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, then beautiful. We swing down onto the railroad tracks and right over the mother bridge.
And over the mother bridge. Sure. Suppose the bridge ain't there.
Oh, man. Don't hit me with them negative waves so early in the morning. Think that bridge will be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be there. It's a mother beautiful bridge. And it's gonna be there.
Donald Sutherland, who was on the verge of death before they started actual shooting. Like, he came over to Yugoslavia, got spinal meningitis. They sent him to England. He was in a coma. They were getting ready to send a telegraph to his wife that he died. And then he gets better and comes back and gives his performance.
And his wife was arrested for trying to buy grenades for the Black Panthers with a personal check during the shooting of Kelly's Heroes as well, which further adds to his counterculture credibility. But
they are both so awesome. I mean, I love Donald Sutherland so much. He is one of those actors who he kind of weirded me out when I was a kid and I would see him in things like Kelly's Heroes and Animal House. But I don't know what it is. If he just has this like impish look on his face all the time, like he's up to no good.
I mean, with the wine and everything, he's like Dionysus, you know?
He is.
He's just, I wouldn't be surprised if he had goat legs under his jerkin, you know? It's just amazing. He's doing this thing with his voice, and he's got this big beard going on, and a flight type helmet, and then he's got, I think him and pretty much everybody in his group all have iron crosses around their necks. I just love his look. Just everything about his performance. And then when he starts to woof towards the end.
Although the barking is one of the best things in the whole movie, but the accent makes me crazy. And if it was anyone other than Donald Sutherland doing it, I don't think I could handle it. But his dialogue, it's so unique. It sort of seems like, I guess I could see why people maybe didn't like this as much as MASH, because it is way more ridiculous and way more, I mean, Where Eagles Dare, which for anyone who doesn't know is also by Brian Hutton, the same director. But while I think Where Eagles Dare is a much more competent heist movie and much more serious and suspenseful and has all these great action sequences, I like Kelly's Heroes more because it is much more, it's just a lot funnier and the characters are a lot more personable, but their dialogue, it's so well cast that everyone's dialogue is really well suited with the particular actor. But like that scene at the end where Donald Sutherland says that with his money, he's going to buy the tank. And I think it's Don Rickles who was like, but the tank is a piece of shit. It doesn't work. It's like he doesn't really care about the money. It seems like he just wanted an adventure.
You mentioned the Iron Cross that he wears, and I was wondering if that was meant to tie him to biker movies, because I think this would have been right around the time that the AIP biker movie wave would have been winding down when Easy Rider was 69, and that's the same year they were shooting this. And I think in interviews, Donald Sutherland was talking about if Oddball was a real person, he might be the leader of a cycle gang. And I wasn't sure if that was part of his influence, was because when I watched the first time I watched it, I was thinking he reminded me of like Maynard G. Krebs from the Dobie Gillis show, like the parody of Beatnik Behavior, but like just that idea of like this spacey, lazy, nonconformist comedy character, because there wouldn't have been that many hippies in Hollywood movies prior to this. And even something like MASH, which kind of got grouped with counterculture, like they're still not technically hippies, even though they smoke weed in the movie and like they're anti-authority, but they're not quite coded as hippie the way Oddball is. But I'm trying to think of what would have been the point of reference. But I'm wondering if maybe like the biker movies would have been part of what informed that character. I was thinking of like, just the notion of anti-war hippies being put in a military situation too, because that seems like such weird counterintuitive way of selling it to an anti-war generation, is to make him a guy blowing away people in a tank as your hippie stand-in. It just seems like the riskiest idea to appeal to young people. But I guess, because that's an element I never knew about, until I saw it recently. I always assumed it was a Clint Eastwood film, or even like knowing that Telly Savalas, who I know from like Kojak or Dirty Dozen, like more of like a straight ahead guy's guy kind of movie. And like Sutherland is the odd man out in that equation. But I think at the time it was a bigger selling point because he was coming right off of MASH, and he would have been like the new thing, like the new way to sell it to young people. All the advertising seemed to like play up the counterculture connection. But now that part is probably the part that isn't really appealing to the main fan base of Kelly's Heroes. It is the people that return to it as like an idiosyncratic war movie, but a war movie is, what I think people primarily know it to be and love it for.
I've never thought about that connection to biker movies, but I could totally see in a sort of extended fantasy universe, Oddball's gang, after they leave the war, going and becoming the crazy biker gang in the first Billy Jack movie. They're basically the same people.
It's funny that you say Billy Jack, because I also thought of Billy Jack in a very roundabout way, because they both have those kind of like groovy pop single kind of theme songs in a way that is like trying to sell the idea of like an ass kicking hippie, because Billy Jack, Vietnam vet, but like, kind of a, groovy peacenik kind of character until you cross him, and it's like the same kind of thing with Sutherland is like, he's your groovy buddy, but he can also, blow away the Nazis. It's just such a weird thing to me that would ever be a trope, even if it's like a limited trope.
The whole thing that he has paint in his shells instead of like real shells.
We got our own ammunition. It's filled with paint. When we fire it, it makes pretty pictures. Scares the hell out of people.
His whole thing of like having the music and stuff, and I'm just like, wow, how many years before Apocalypse Now is this? It's pretty fantastic.
There's this really interesting connection between the sort of stuff that he does in Kelly's Heroes and this idea of like underground artist protests. Like it's basically like they're spreading terror through loud music and explosions and all this kind of subterfuge. Like they attach a pipe so it makes it look like their gun is a much bigger caliber than it actually is. I do really like that idea of trying to figure out who the hell this character is supposed to appeal to. Some of it might be related to the way mainstream Hollywood saw the counterculture movement in 1969, 1970 versus the way we see it now. Now, it's weird to think about hippies being in a role like this, but at the time, you could kind of connect it to some of the early 70s movies where, like I Drink Your Blood, where you have these hippies who are in this cult and they're just insane and violent. Maybe in a mainstream way, it seems like there's a big divide, but if you think about some of those character types in cult movies, like definitely Billy Jack and some of the crazy hippie, like post-Manson movies, his character seems to be more linked to those than to the mainstream hippie movies.
Well, if you look at the script, I think one thing that changed a lot was the sexuality of Kelly's heroes, the amount of nudity that was in the original script. The sexually liberated aspect of the counterculture was always the part that made the most sense to conservative viewers at that time. And I think that, like, the fact that, like, you first meet him, he's got a girl in his bed, and, like, there's, like, girls hanging out with his crew, and, like, they were, you know, like, half naked in the script. I mean, it's a PG movie now, but it was, you know, a little bit racier. I think that, you know, at that time, that's the time of films like Joe, you know, like all these films that have this idea of, like, the counterculture and free love, and, like, you know, it's both horrified and attracted to that element of it. And I think that Kelly's Heroes flirted with that maybe more on the page than in what we get.
Wasn't Ingrid Pitt supposed to be in the movie in, like, a big female role, and then it was cut at the last minute?
Yeah, there's, like, no female dialogue in Kelly's Heroes.
No, which is fascinating because, I mean, if you think about this as a companion piece to Where Eagles Dare, she has a pretty big role in that. But one of my biggest frustrations with the film is I feel like it's way too long. And so if you were going to include more sexual content or female characters, like, would it feel even more bloated than it does now? I mean, I don't really know the answer to that, but it seems like it wouldn't make sense to have side characters unless they were directly involved with the bank heist in some way.
Yeah, I think what you probably would have gotten would have been like a Dirty Dozen, kind of like, you know, Gallery of Horrors, or same with Castle Keep as well. Like, it would have been, you know, that would have been the only function they would have had in the script. So I don't really miss them, but it is weird that there are not even any female characters that talk in this movie.
I was, a totally random aside, was talking about Ninth Configuration earlier today, and that's another one of those totally weirdo anti-war war movies that also there are no women. And it's interesting to me to think about how those sorts of films play out and what the dynamic winds up being, because it's like you've got to have character tension somewhere. And when there's no way to have romantic tension, it's kind of interesting to think about where it winds up instead. And here it's like there isn't so much of that because this is a comedy, but something that I didn't notice as much in past viewings is about halfway through, when they have that first big kind of siege that puts them past, like, further past enemy lines than any of the other Allied forces are. There's that sequence in the field where they kill a bunch of German soldiers and they're all a little bit taken aback by it. Like, even Telly Savalas' character, it's like, this isn't it. The movie makes it clear for the first time that even though they're being very matter of fact in their dialogue about war and violence, when it actually comes down to it, it's like they don't want to do it.
Well, and there was a scene that was supposed to follow that where Kelly and Big Joe are talking about, you know, how they had to leave some of their men behind in that field and they weren't able to go back and get them. And the idea of maybe not all of them were dead that were there, that they had to end up leaving them while they might have still been alive. And, like, Big Joe is really giving it to Kelly as far as, like, you know, Eugene was very close to me. He was the only regular soldier in the outfit. He was the only one with what I would call a sense of duty, and we left him to rot in a lousy minefield. And then Kelly's just like, he could have bought it 50 times in the last 6 months, you know, and it's like this going back and forth as far as, like, are you going to die for the American cause? You're going to die for our cause, or are you just going to die? This whole back and forth between the two of them, I thought was very effective. And that's one of those scenes where I'm just like, yeah, this is probably why Clint Eastwood was a little mad at the way that they recut the movie afterwards. I'm sure he probably didn't mind losing, like, the Germans and the naked women swimming in a swimming hole kind of thing, because it really doesn't add that much to the film. But stuff like this, interchanges like that, I'm just like, well, yeah, that actually kind of says something. That would have been a nice thing to have.
Yeah, I think it also adds to this whole anti-war kind of counterculture thing that we've been talking about, where it's very confusing to have a film like this that it's like, on one hand, it's a conventional war comedy, and on the other hand, it's a weird Vietnam era anti-war movie. And I think sometimes those two different ideas clash in the movie. Some of that clash is because they cut some of those scenes that you're talking about.
At the very end of the script, does the gold get destroyed by one of their own rockets? Because I think that also drives home the point that it's all kind of in vain if they had kept that ending. I don't even know if they shot that. Yeah, you're talking about that scene where Big Joe confronts him about the value of the entire exercise. And it's also right after another scene that was not included where the men kind of mutiny a little bit and they're pushing back on it. And so all of this drama that really kind of changes the vibe of the whole film is all missing. And I think that's why, you said Eastwood was upset. I know he also wasn't, I don't know if he had the greatest sense of humor about the Leone parody at the end.
I mean, I don't think we could say that Clint Eastwood has a great sense of humor, period.
Except when he has a chimpanzee.
Except for when he is alone on stage with a chair.
Bill, you are 100% correct that there is that. I don't know if it's the same P-47 that shot at them earlier in the script, but it is definitely a P-47 that comes barreling towards them. The truck breaks, the men abandon them in panic, the plane screams down and down. The men reaching for safety turn, wheel, yell, and screech at the oncoming bomber. Intercut, Big Joe, Little Joe, Gutowski, and group. Finally, Kelly stands watching the plane and philosophically shakes his head. The P-47 pulling out at maximum speed levels for the attack. From the pilot's POV, the onrushing targets, the gold glinting. Close up, the P-47, its rockets fire, immediately freeze frame, the end.
Yeah, because that gives a kind of like the original Ocean's 11 kind of vibe, where like the riches at the end are destroyed, and it becomes that caper was all for naught, but didn't we have fun along the way? Like that kind of ending. But just the whole notion of, is this an anti-war film? Because the way we have it now, everyone walks away rich, and a few people get taken down along the way, but for the most part, everyone is better off than before we met them. I understand like it's showing a cynical vision of their motives, but do you think that, somebody walking away from that, like an audience member would think like, well, this is clear that war is wrong?
I see what you mean. And I guess maybe it's not that there's this clear war is wrong message, but the message is that war is pointless and war is meaningless. And all of the protests around Vietnam, for the most part, are like, why are we there? What is the objective? People are getting killed for no reason. This war is never going to end. There's no kind of clear resolution that could play out. But I think for World War II, it's the opposite, where there is sort of this clear anti-fascist, anti-Axis powers in general goal that went behind so much of the Western Allied propaganda. And the clear objective, of course, is defeating Hitler or defeating Hirohito or whichever, theater you want to focus on. And so I think what makes it feel anti-war to me, looking at it through the lens of World War II and World War II movies, is that it's one of the few World War II films that basically says this war, despite its clear objective and the sort of moral issues behind it, the whole connection to genocide, it's saying this war is pointless. Like, why is everyone here? Nothing is happening. No one can communicate. Nobody knows where they're supposed to be going or what they're supposed to be doing. So, you have these people who are just going to kind of make the best of a bad situation, and they just happen to get lucky, which I still can't believe that this is based on a real story. Like, knowing humans, I can, but the fact that they got away with it is just incredible.
Yeah, they recovered 2 bars from all the gold that was stolen, I think.
Yeah, and I think not until the late 70s or something.
Yeah, and it wasn't even validated until I read earlier, 97. Yeah, I'm sure everybody that took the rest of the gold have had a pretty merry life.
Well earned. It was Nazi gold, so it deserves to be stolen, but also the fact that when they went to write the script and heard rumors of this heist, but they still weren't able to get any clear information because there either wasn't any or it was all still highly classified is amazing.
Yeah, I know Troy Kennedy Martin, who you were talking about trying to find out more about this heist that actually happened. He had even talked about adding more gravitas to the script, like the one that we've read from June, July of 69. I think there was an earlier draft, one from May, that was even harder, and I think that's probably the one that got Eastwood really engaged in this. And I don't know if it was in the script or if he just talked about it, but he was talking about writing a scene of like a train going to Auschwitz kind of thing, and the men seeing the train and then having a decision point, like, do we go stop the train or do we continue on? I think that would have completely, pardon the pun, derailed the film, because it'd be like, what the fuck are you doing after Gold when all of these lives are being lost? Because it's a good thing where they're at and that they don't see the atrocities, because otherwise it'd be like, man, I have no respect for these guys. But as it is, it's like they're just having a fun jaunt, you know, even though they're going across this freshly plowed field that obviously has landmines in it. Probably a dumb thing to do, but at least they're a happy band and they don't have to worry about the atrocities of war too much.
The script you're talking about, I mean, would have been Don Siegel attached originally too. And so I don't think of him as a comedy director. I think you could have potentially had a much all around harder film, you know, had they, you know, gone in the original, with the original concept, original team. But I mean, I don't know what that would have looked like. Probably very different. Probably not, you know, we probably would not have the oddball we know and love today.
And that would be a crime.
You mentioned the pop song, the Burning Bridges song, and it is, it's so unusual. I mean, you've got like the Lalo Schifrin score, and there's a lot of different things that he's doing with that. You've got the section that he said was basically a parody of Bridge on the River Kwai. So you've got the whistling and all this kind of stuff. It's a great, great song. And then, yeah, he does the spaghetti western Morricone riff towards the end, which the first time I saw that, I just was laughing so hard. And then it was him and I can't remember the name of the musician that did the Burning Bridges song.
Mike Curb.
Thank you. And it was them working together. So it's got like this great introduction, which sounds very much like this marching music, and it's really, really good. And I'll play later on in the show, I'll play a DJ Green Lantern did a remix of a Beastie Boys song, and he used that little opening of Burning Bridges to go against the Beastie Boys, which was fantastic. But yeah, and then the singers, the Mike Curb singers start up, and it's just like, what am I watching? And it happens like, 3 or 4 times in the movie, even like in the end credits. Yeah. At least it's better than Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, because I honestly can't watch Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid anymore because of that scene. Like, I need to do a director's cut or a fan edit of that and cut that fucking scene out because I just can't stand it.
Kelly's Heroes had, I want to say there was at least 2 major regime changes at MGM between when they started the film and when it came out. Mike Curb was like 25 at the time, and I guess he got hired with that. Is it James Aubrey? I think is the guy's name. But he got hired in like that regime that put it out. But he was somebody that he had a tendency to add pop songs to MGM's films, including ones that he wrote himself in order to generate hit singles for the films. He needed that to Zabriskie Point too, the Antonioni film. So I always thought that was so strange. Like the first time I watched it, I'm like, what is this song about? Like, why is this here? I was thinking about the lyrics too, because the lyrics are about like severing ties with old friends and not appreciating the good things that they did. And I'm like, how does this apply to Kelly's Heroes other than?
It doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, there are literal bridges that are destroyed, but I don't know if they represent like friendship.
Right.
No, it makes no sense, but that in itself is kind of funny. Like, I don't think it's meant to be funny. I don't think it's intentionally that way. It just is ridiculous.
Yeah, Mike Curb, I learned that he wrote like campaign songs for Nixon and Reagan.
Oh my God. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. That worked too. That both of them got elected. But yeah, I was thinking about how, like, in the screenplay we read, that opening where Kelly kidnaps the German soldier plays like an action scene, but having burning bridges play underneath it like robs it of all tension it could have, and it just feels like weird. It just feels weird. Like, I don't know if that was I don't know at what point they made that the strategy, if that was like, we've got to get, this MASH generation in and this is how we do it. But they definitely went with a choice to make this more counterculture friendly from the outset.
But I feel like that's the vibe of the whole movie, is what you just said, where it's just weird and you spend the whole time kind of wondering, who is this for? Like, what is happening here?
Just back to Oddball, just thinking of him and his whole power positive thinking thing, it's just like him and Moriarty. Those are probably my favorite bits in the film, is just watching Sutherland and MacLeod going back and forth. I mean, I don't know how many times I quote that whole negative waves thing, but it is just fucking fantastic. And yeah, it's makes
so good.
No sense. I love it.
I would like to think that Donald Sutherland improvised some of that dialogue. That might not be true, but you can't convince me otherwise.
It's not in the script. And I wanted to just give a shout out to my favorite bit of business he did, which is the line where he learns that Kelly had accidentally killed people on their side. And he just starts laughing.
Yes.
Before his line is like, "I don't like officers." But the way he laughs about this horrible thing, and the look on Don Rickles' face as he realizes he's dealing with this madman, is my favorite moment for Oddball.
There's also during that same scene, there's the great moment where Donald Sutherland says, "I don't like officers," and I forget who is telling him about Kelly, but their response is well, he doesn't either.
There is stuff about the negative waves in the script, like Moriarty. Don't tell Oddball or he'll start in with that crap about negative waves.
My favorite of the moments, or one of my favorite moments with him, is when the tank breaks down and Moriarty is fixing it, and he says that line that I said in the very beginning of this episode, where Telly Savalas comes up and basically says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Drinking wine, eating cheese, and soaking up rays." And the look that Telly Savalas gets on his face is like he's in actual physical pain. This is why do I have to deal with this person? But I have to say, as far as key dialogue goes, I think Carol O'Connor almost competes with Donald Sutherland. They're probably my single favorite line in the entire movie is at the end when the general is approaching the town where the bank heist is. The French people confuse him, or I guess it might be I think they're supposed to be maybe in the Alsace area because they seem to be French people, but I know that they're actually supposed to be in German occupied territory. They think that de Gaulle is on the way to liberate them, and somebody tells the general that they've confused him with de Gaulle, and he lets out this quick little line where he says, "De Gaulle, he's not even in this war."
I love Telly Savalas constantly ripping on Don Rickles and calling him hustler. I don't know what it is, but just the way he says hustler, it's just it's like a little knife wound every time he does it.
It is. And there's the great scene where Don Rickles is wounded and Telly Savalas shows some genuine concern, and then Don Rickles makes fun of him, and he's like, "Well, fine then," and walks away.
Right. Apparently, Telly Savalas got stabbed during the making of the movie. One of the guys had his bayonet was too sharp and sliced Savalas in the arm. And so you can tell during the movie, whether he has his sleeves rolled up or sleeves rolled down, because he got cut right on the arm. So they had to rush him to the hospital. Blood was gushing out. People are going crazy. And he's just like, "Can somebody help me out here? Come on."
It's just a flesh wound.
That's something that I wasn't able to appreciate the way viewers at the time would have not had, I don't think, any other opportunities to see Telly Savalas as a heroic character. Because I think before this, he would have just specialized in villain parts. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think of like Lisa and the Devil and things like that. And obviously him, God, his turn as Maggot in the Dirty Dozen is so fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I think Birdman of Alcatraz.
Yes, and Kojak doesn't start until like 3 or 4 years later, which as we record this, I'm facing a Kojak doll and packs of commemorative bubble gum with Telly Savalas on as Kojak on them.
Yeah, and I guess he was Blofeld right before Blofeld, somewhere right around here as well.
Yes, I think is that 71?
I think it's 69. I want to say it was pre-70s.
He is fantastic in there.
I still haven't seen McKenna's Gold, which I know he's in as well, but I've heard that that's good as well, so I need to check that out. Definitely need a lot more Telly Savalas in my life.
Yes, you should probably do a Telly Savalas month at some point with all your free time.
I don't know if it's in the script or not, but it's not in the script that it wasn't in the script that we read, but he has a line when the guy comes to bring him news about their mission, and his line is, "Take the underwear off your head, enough is enough."
Yes.
And I'd like to believe that was his contribution to the improvisation of the thing.
I hope so, because when he says it, he sounds so disgusted.
The thing where Crap Game, the Don Rickles character, is talking to Lieutenant Barbara, or whatever
Barbara.
his rank is. Yeah, that whole thing is not in the script. So that little exchange there, which is a strange exchange about, you love your mother? You miss your mother?
And then he barely acknowledges his presence, so Don Rickles just is like, okay then, nice talking to you, and walks away.
That scene where he's on the phone also, and he's like, and don't start crying yet, I haven't even asked you yet. Like, those feel like improv scenes that they just told Rickles to just make a funny scene out of nothing. Cause yeah, I don't think that scene with Barbara is scripted. And I just wanted to note that Barbara, like, I don't know if you agree with me. He reminds me of like, almost like a Mickey Rooney, Andy Hardy type of character. Like, his comic delivery feels like a screwball comedy. Like, what his character and some of the other ones feel almost like of a war comedy from like 2 or 3 decades earlier. And I always thought that was such a strange kind of, blend with like the Sutherland stuff, which feels like more contemporary. I don't know if you also got that vibe.
Yes. And I think that's part of what makes this so weird, is that sometimes it seems like it wants to be a conventional World War II comedy, like the sort of thing coming out in the 50s and early 60s, like something like Operation Petticoat. And then all of a sudden it's this weird hippie Donald Sutherland causing chaos movie. And it's like, what is this? Pick a tone.
I love it for its faults rather than hate it. But if somebody told me they hated this movie, I'd be like, yeah, sure, I can completely get behind that. I completely understand why you would hate this.
My thing is, I always find flawed movies that try to do something interesting more fascinating than movies that are just perfect. Like, they're just more fun to talk about. And with this, I don't know if I could between Donald Sutherland, who I am in love with, and Telly Savalas, my number one childhood crush, like, I don't see how somebody could hate this movie, because they're both just so great. But it is long. And I think some of those like battle sequences, it's like, all right, we could probably edit about half an hour out of the movie if those were tightened up.
It is long. And yeah, you do get Burning Bridges playing quite a few times.
You do, but you get the fake jangling spurs at the end.
Oh, God. So good. And I love the guy that plays the main Nazi. He has such a great look to him. Just that scar on his face, and that he barely opens his eyes. It almost looks like his eyes have been sewn shut.
Part of what I love so much about that character, even though he has just a very brief role, is I think we're taught to expect, especially through mainstream media, that Nazis were always ideologically obsessed with the political movement, with Hitler. They were in the war to, kill Jews and take over the world. But like the truth is that the majority of Nazis were there because they were conscripted. And so I do think you had a lot of people like that character who's like, well, I'm here and me and all of my friends are being slaughtered, so I'm just going to try to survive. And he's like, you know what? Fuck it. And I love that editing in that scene with him is so great because they don't even show him responding. Kelly and Joe sort of pitch to him this idea that we're doing this bank heist. You could help us by blowing a hole through the doors of that bank. And it immediately cuts to the doors being blown open.
I love it. Yeah, it's like he turns his head and looks, and rather than it being a POV shot of what he's seeing, it suddenly becomes the bank exploding. It's just like, wow, that is nice. I love that subtlety.
Like he didn't even have to think about it.
Right.
Yeah, I think Big Joe is the only character that needs any persuading to steal things in this movie.
Yeah.
Yes, and he's the opposite of Oddball in every way.
Yes.
I haven't seen the film, so I didn't get a chance to watch it in time, but I don't know if either of you have seen The Young Lions, but I've read that German tank commander was supposed to be a parody of the Brando character from The Young Lions.
No, I haven't seen that, but now I have to.
I can kind of see the look. Yeah, I can kind of see that.
Yeah, both the appearance and the manner of speaking were apparently, that's an inside joke or a reference, but I hadn't seen The Young Lions, so I couldn't validate that. But
what I want to know is where the hell Oddball's accent is supposed to be from.
He's based on the real guy that pulled off the heist. I think that's, the only historically accurate part of Kelly's Heroes.
That should be on the poster, 100% historically accurate.
I would love it if somebody opened those confidential depositions and it just has all these lines like, look, I was just trying to fight off the negative waves.
Look, Kelly, a tiger has only one weak point. That's its ass. You gotta hit it point blank, and you gotta hit it from behind. Now, we do not have the element of surprise. They will hear our Detroit motors long before we ever even get inside that town.
And what if I can show you a way to get into that town so they don't hear you?
Hey, Oddball. This is your hour of glory, and you're checking it out.
To a New Yorker like you, a hero is some type of weird sandwich, not some nut who takes on 3 tigers.
Nobody's asking you to be a hero.
No? Then you sit up in that turret, baby.
No, because you're going to be up there, baby, and I'll be right outside showing you which way to go.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Crazy. I mean, so many positive ways. Maybe we can't lose. You're on.
Clint Eastwood and Telly Savalas exchange a look like, oh, Christ.
Have either of you seen a movie called Brass Target?
No.
That's from 1978. It's also MGM. It's John, is it Who or How? But it's also based on that same, Nazi gold, theft idea, but it's based on the robbery of the Nazi gold and the conspiracy to kill Patton. Sophia Loren, John Cassavetes, George Kennedy, Max von Sydow. It has a pretty prestigious cast, but I've never heard of it until I was looking into the real life case, and so there was another film inspired by that same thievery towards the end of World War II, and also the same studio as Kelly's Heroes.
That sounds amazing, just from the
that
cast itself.
I would love to imagine Max von Sydow as Oddball.
Why are you hitting me with these negative ways?
But in my head, he would be a lot like his character in the great, basically beer version of Hamlet with Rick Moranis.
Oh, Strange Brew.
Yes. It would be like his character in Strange Brew, except mixed with Oddball.
Well, let's go ahead, guys, and take a break, and we're going to play a trio of interviews. First up, we'll hear the rest of our interview with John Landis that we did a few months ago. This is all about his work on Kelly's Heroes. After that, we'll hear from Little Joe, Stuart Margolin. And last but not least, we'll hear from Moriarty himself, Gavin MacLeod. And we'll be back with all of those right after these brief messages.
Let me ask you a question. Are you getting enough? I bet you'd love more, right? Well, AdamandEve.com wants to give you more with 10 free gifts. First, you'll get a sexy surprise for her. Second, a specially selected toy for him. And third, a little something we know you'll both enjoy. Plus, you'll get 6 full-length adult movies on DVD. And number 10, free shipping on your entire order. So what do you have to do to get your 10 free gifts? It's not hard. Just go to adamandeve.com and select any one item. It could be an adventurous new toy, sexy piece of lingerie, or anything you desire. Just enter offer code BOOTH at checkout, and you'll get all 10 free gifts. Go check out adamandeve.com today. Select one item and get 10 free gifts, including free shipping when you enter offer code BOOTH. That's BOOTH at adamandeve.com.
It's not easy having a good time, and it's not cheap either. Every week, the Projection Booth brings you a new show, possibly even 2, focusing on all genres of cinema. If you've sat through the 7-hour Conan episode, the 6-hour Star Wars episode, or even the hour-long Superbman episode, you know that Mike and his co-host put forth a lot of work into researching the movies, tracking down the interview subjects, and putting together one of the best podcasts on the internet. Now I'm asking you if you can repay all that hard work by giving back to the Projection Booth. The show has a Patreon fundraiser at Patreon. That's patreon.com/Projection Booth. You can donate as little as $1 a month. That's $12 a year. At least 50 great shows and 2 terrible ones. That's the price of 2 matinee tickets. Now, isn't the Projection Booth worth it? Once again, that's patreon.com/Projection Booth. Donate today. It's the right thing to do.
Hi, this is Andrew from We Hate Movies, and you're listening to the Projection Booth. If you feel like laughing after listening to some serious film discussion, head on over to our show, WHMPodcast.com. Every Tuesday, a new episode drops, us ragging on bad movies, whereas the good folks here at the Projection Booth are talking about good, hearty, cinema-related stuff. Go here for the cinema, come to us for the laughs afterwards. We Hate Movies every Tuesday.
Could you tell me what your experiences were like working on Kelly's Heroes?
Oh, pretty wonderful and insane. That's really, even though I had jobs on other little movies and stuff, but that's really the first feature, big Hollywood, or big European, I don't know, MGM, big movie. I mean, that was a big movie, and it was shot behind the Iron Curtain, and it was wonderful. I was 9 months in what's now, it's the former Yugoslavia. And Tito was alive, very different. The Cold War was really something. And in 1969, it was, alive and well. And, the Ruskies were the bad guys, and there was the Berlin Wall. And after World War II, basically, there was a thing called the Marshall Plan. And the United States really did kind of finance the reconstruction of Europe. I mean, Germany was leveled in World War II. It was destroyed completely. And Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Poland. And it was very extremely devastating in Europe. And in the former Yugoslavia, it was really bad. However, when the war was finished, they started the Marshall Plan. And slowly but surely, Paris and France rebuilt, and England rebuilt, and Spain under Franco rebuilt. And, things started to improve tremendously. So by the 60s, if you were in Western Europe or on, the west side of the wall, basically, it was like, James Bond movies. It looked, things were coming back. Although when I went to make An American Werewolf in London, and that was 1980, the vast majority of buildings in England, now everybody got a shower, but then if you wanted a shower, you sort of went to a hotel, and even then a modern hotel, a new hotel. But the other side of the Iron Curtain, it really was it was like 1946, 1947, because it was bombed out. You went to Prague or Warsaw or, it was really, Budapest bombed out. It was like, holy shit. The war was very present. And in Yugoslavia, because it was Tito, so it wasn't under Soviet domination, but it still was there, the Russians were there. It was kind of amazing because I don't know if it's in the Billy Wilder movie 1, 2, 3 or some other Peter Sellers or Peter O'Toole movie. I've forgotten, but there's some movie where you see like this streets are filled with people and wild parties and confetti and bright lights and music and everyone dancing and there's wild champagne, and then the camera pans over to this big wall and goes up over the wall, and on the other side of the wall it's dark and gray and wet cobblestones and only soldiers and depressing, and you go back over the wall and it's whoopee, and it, that's a gross exaggeration, but it was very good metaphor. It was quite something. And so to go to Yugoslavia was wild. I was 18 too, but it was like, holy shit, big soldiers with jackboots and Kalashnikovs and big hammers and sickles everywhere and hardly any food. It was incredibly poor. Then here comes this MGM movie, and it had a British camera crew. It had British scripts, British electric, German, Austrian special effects, British makeup and hair, and French, Italian stills, Italian wardrobe. It was a very international crew. The American director, American stars. It was Clint Eastwood, Telly Savalas, Don Sutherland. I mean, he's Canadian, but he's American. Don Rickles. It's where I met all those guys, and it was a wonderful time. I mean, I loved it because I had all the joy and excitement of making a big production and working on a huge show with thousands of Yugoslav soldiers dressed as Nazis or dressed as GIs. It was big and huge. We were blowing buildings up. A lot of the buildings we blew up were real. They just bought them and blew them up. It was wonderful. But I had all the pleasure and excitement, but none of the responsibility. Technically, I guess I was what was then called a gopher and now called a PA. Because of the unusual circumstances of that movie, I really had a tremendous amount of responsibility, more than I ever should have. I mean, during the 9 months we shot in Yugoslavia, MGM changed management, I think 3 or 4 times. So we're this huge movie, and the director, Brian Hutton, was kind of a wild man. Long hair and black cowboy hat, black sweater. He was wild, and it was nuts. It was really fun and nuts. It was a very entertaining time, and for a little, innocent 18-year-old me, it was a real eye-opener. I mean, it was like, whoa, everything that could happen did happen on that movie. So it was wonderful for me. I don't think it was very good for the stockholders of MGM, but it did end up becoming quite a hit. It did okay in the States, but in England, it was like number 2 picture of the year. And the movie's terribly odd. It's a deeply weird movie. Yeah, you have a hippie in World War II, and there were some very funny things that don't play and were kind of cut out of the movie. That it had such bizarre. Even being a kid on the set, there were moments when I went, "This doesn't make any sense." I mean, they're trooping through enemy territory, and like, look, there's an open plowed field. Let's walk across that. It was like no cover. And like, what? I kept saying, but why would they would never, like, John, shut up. And then a guy blows up, and they're all very serious, and you're going, well, how can you be serious? I mean, the movie had a tone issue, but it was had wonderful things in it. And Don Rickles, who was there with his wife and baby daughter, Mindy, I was one of the few people who knew who he was because, you know, the Brits and the French and the Yugoslavs, Don Rickles, who the fuck is that? I mean, he's a very, very American comedian. He's not known anywhere else. He was so funny. They'd do a scene and Clint would finish and Rickles would go, Brian, you're going to print that? You're going to walk away? That's it? That's it? What are you going to animate over Eastwood? He was so funny. But in the movie, his character, there's something I remember. In the movie, his character, Crap Game is his name. He's supposed to be carrying, he has to schlep a 50 caliber machine gun once they get strafed by an Allied plane. And those things weigh a ton. They are really heavy. The prop department made a fiberglass reproduction of a 50 caliber machine gun, and it looked perfect. And the prop guy, Dave Jordan, who was props on Lawrence of Arabian, this English guy, great stories. Anyway, he said, John, take this to Rickles. So I'm carrying the 50 caliber machine gun, but it weighs maybe 2 pounds, you know. It's a model for Rickles to carry. And the director, Brian Hutton, says, Landis, what the fuck is that? And I said, look, it looks great. I'm going to give it to Don. Instead of carrying something that weighs 300 pounds on his shoulder, maybe he could just... So Brian takes the gun, says to me, put it in my trailer. And if you tell Rickles about this, I'll break your fucking leg. And for the whole movie, Rickles is schlepping 300 pounds. In fact, in the movie, you see him complaining about it. I got to carry this goddamn, you know, it's like, and he's complaining about it all the time. And everyone thought it was so funny, but I don't know, it just bothered me. I kept saying, you know, Brian, that's really, shut up, Landis. You know, it was a wonderful experience for me. I was a mailboy at Fox, and I knew a man named Andrew Marton, who was called Bundy Marton, Bandi, Hungarian, American, but Hungarian. He was one of the many people who came to flee Hitler. You know, Bundy was very successful director at UFA. Started in Germany, started in silence, and he was actually cutting a picture in the cutting room next to Leni Riefenstahl, who's cutting Triumph of the Will. And the brown shirts are rising, and it's getting weirder and weirder. Fritz Lang, who was running, you know, came into his cutting room, and he said, Bundy, I think we have to get out of here. Bundy says, why? He said, I have a bad feeling. And Fritz just left. He flew to Hollywood, you know. And so Bundy was one of the few Jews left, and his editor was a communist, a member of the Communist Party. And one day he came to work in a brown shirt, and Bundy said, what the fuck is this? And he said, Bundy, don't worry, I'm a roast beef Nazi. Bundy says, what is a roast beef Nazi? And the guy says, I'm brown on the outside, but red on the inside. And he said, you know, he would be fired. To keep his job, he had to join the party. So Bundy picked up the phone, called his wife, Yarmila, and he said, pack one bag. I'll be there in 20 minutes. They got in the car, and they drove all the way to the Swiss border and went into Switzerland, and they closed the border like 10 hours later. He would have been dead if he had stayed. And he ended up in Hollywood, and like everybody. And Bundy, or Andrew Marton, well, but his most famous credit, which is pathetic, but is the chariot race in Ben-Hur, because Bundy became a second unit director. Not because he wanted to, you know. He actually directed a lot of movies. He directed King Solomon's Mines, you know, with Stuart Granger. He directed some picture with Grace Kelly about a green fire. He directed actually a really interesting movie, considering what's happening right now, but it was one of the first movies shot in Germany after the war. And it was called The Devil Makes Three with Gene Kelly and Pierre Angeli. And it's an interesting movie because it's about Nazis, neo-Nazis in occupied Berlin. And it's, you know, I don't know if you've been following the news, but there's a huge Nazi resurgence in Germany, in the military and especially in the police. They're wonderful. I mean, you should, if you want to talk about the Blues Brothers, we should talk about the Blues Brothers. But you get me going on Bundy. He was very nice to me. I met him when I was 15. He directed like Around the World Under the Sea and one of the Cinerama movies, but he directed a shitload of movies. Men of the Fighting Lady with Ronald Reagan, and he was at MGM for a long time, and they started using him to direct action sequences. And in fact, Billy Wilder once said to me, he said, I'm going to write a picture. And when the boss is hitting on the secretary, and finally he gets her in his office, he locks the door, and he's going to chase her around the desk, but I'm going to bring in Bundy Martin to shoot the chase. So when you get a reputation like that, Hollywood's all about typecasting, and so it's like, you make these kind of movies, or your specialty is this, which of course is absolute bullshit, because filmmaking, whether it's a drama or a comedy or a science fiction movie or a horror film or a romance or a tragedy, whatever it is, telling a narrative by montage, meaning the juxtaposition of images to create a story, is exactly the same job, regardless of genre, regardless of budget. And by the way, motion pictures, regardless of whether it's film or digital, it's the same thing. It's put the recording device, the camera here, and you guys do this, And I've always been fascinated. There's a real misnomer, which is that, he can handle a big movie. What does that mean? I mean, the director's job is identical. Instead of you 6 guys do this, it's you 1,100 guys do this. But it's the same job, and the setup's the same. And filmmaking, if you know how to direct and if you have the craft down, people say, he specializes in horror, or he specializes in comedy, or he specializes, whatever. I find it disheartening because it limits right away the kind of work you can get. However, people like Alfred Hitchcock, they sort of embraced it finally, and then he polished his brand, became the master of suspense, and so that's what he did. And it's just an interesting phenomenon, and I guess it's true in everything. Bundy became the big action guy. So, the very first movie I ever worked on, I only worked on 3 weeks because I hated it, was Catch-22, which is a very good movie. Have you ever seen it? It's really impressive. The one with Orson Welles. Well, all the flying in that, those B-25s, that's all real. And those planes landing and taking off. And that Bundy did all the flying. And I worked on he gave me a job on the second unit. And I'm in the belly of a B-25. And how they fought a war in those things, I don't know, because these were all real B-25 from the war. And they were held together by gaffer tape. So you'd fly, and it would shake so violently, it would just shake as you flew, just this constant shake. And when you landed, your jaw would hurt and your nipples would hurt. I'm serious, because your jaw would hurt from and your nipples would hurt from the constant. It was weird and very unpleasant, but we would go up for 4 hours at a time and shoot formations and do all that. See the movie again. It's amazing what we did, and coordinated stuff with the actions, the famous opening shot. It's amazing. Anyway, I worked on a second unit. My job, I was in a belly of a B-25 on a radio going, that was in Mexico, in Guaymas. I'd be going in San Carlos, actually. Bendero es roja. Bendero es... I hated it. I kept thinking, what is this? This is traffic control. This is not filming. And we'd be up in the air, and I'd look down there, and I'd go, down there is Mike Nichols and, Orson Welles and, all these amazing actors. And I'm flying around in this plane. So I quit. I just didn't like it. I was not near enough production. I was in production of flying stuff, but, anyway, so I went back to the mailroom where I was closer to show shooting. And then Bundy got a job to direct all the second unit on Kelly's Heroes. And he said, if you can get to Yugoslavia, I'll try to give you a job. So because I was 18, I took that as, oh, no problem. I took all the money I had in the world by that time I had probably close to like $1,000 because I used to get paid $48 a week at Fox. That's quite a while ago. That's in the 60s, but still. So I had about $1,000. And I'll never forget, a one-way flight from LA to London was $800 TWA. And I thought, well, London can't be far from Belgrade. I was totally ignorant, completely ignorant. I knew my friend's father was working on writing a Carl Foreman movie, so he was in London, and I thought, I could stay with them and then just hitchhike to. By the way, that's the 60s. It's a very different time.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, so I told my mother. What I did was I bought the ticket, and I told my mother that I had the job, and she didn't believe me till I showed her the ticket. Then she believed me. Anyway, I went to. Took me quite a while to get there. I went to London, and then anyway, I got to Belgrade, and I got there before the unit. So I was like a week in Belgrade going, it was very scary there. And I ended up working on the picture and having a wonderful time. And from there, I went to Spain. After Yugoslavia, a guy named Jim O'Rourke and I, he had a VW Bug, and we drove from Belgrade to Madrid. That was at the height, that 1970, the height of the spaghetti boom. It may have still been 69, actually, because I turned 19 in August. So we went to Spain, and we just lucked into being there at exactly the right moment, where Franco was making it advantageous financially to shoot in Spain. So suddenly, there were movies being made, hundreds of movies, Italian movies, German movies, British movies, American movies, Spanish. Everyone was making movies in Spain. That was the spaghetti boom. So I worked on so many movies. I mean, it's too long a story and boring. Let's forget all this and go to the Blues Brothers.
How did you decide that you wanted to be an actor?
I always had the bug. I just didn't pursue it in school. And then when I got out of school, my older brother was actually an actor for a period of time, and he was appearing as Peter in Diary of Anne Frank on Broadway. So I went to live with him, studied speech and studied acting, and studied at a place in Colorado called the Perry Mansfield Theater. Two women, Charlotte Perry and Portia Mansfield, ran in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I acted there and met a man named Barney Brown, and he was my mentor. He was teaching the Stanislavski method, and I became a very much a method actor as a young person in terms of believing in it. And that's by then, my mind had been made up.
How old were you when you managed to break into television?
I think I was 20 or 21, one or the other. It was Gertrude Berg on CBS, as I recall, called Mrs. G Goes to College. And Gertrude Berg was the star, and I played a student at the college where she was going to school.
Not only are you an actor, but you also have had not just a toe in music, but you've had the whole foot. You've been really involved in the music scene. How did that happen?
It happened by accident. A friend of mine, who's still a friend of mine, I might add, named Murray MacLeod. He and I went to high school together in Scottsdale, Arizona. Then when I was out in L.A., I had written a one-act play, and the actor in the play, a guy named Smokey Robards, he said, we're writing songs together with a guy you went to high school with. And so I started hanging around with them. They brought in a young composer producer named Jerry Riopel. They formed a group called The Parade, which was signed by A&M Records. They had a big hit called Sunshine Girl in 1967, and I and Jerry Riopel started working together, and we wrote songs, I'd say up until his death 2 years ago, February. Part of that was, writing songs. I also wrote some television movies, and we started doing the score for those. Murray and Jerry and I done that on numerous occasions since then, or certainly been involved with the music.
You even recorded an album. How did that come about?
That was the good fortune of knowing Jim Garner. And Jim Garner, he knew the whole time we were working, for the many years we worked together, that I had an interest in a very deep commitment to music. And I had written a number of songs, and he became aware of the songs I wrote. So one time Warner Brothers asked him to appear in a pilot about Maverick, and he said, "Why would I do that?" And they said, "Well, we'll give you whatever you want if you give us one day's appearance." And so he said, "Do an album with Stuart Margolin," and that's how it came about.
That's a good friend indeed. Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me about getting the role in Kelly's Heroes and what that experience was like. Had you ever been to Yugoslavia before?
Oh, actually, I had been here before, curiously enough. I did a film called The Gamblers. It was shot in Dubrovnik, for the most part. So I went, and then, just as luck would have it, I met Brian Hutton, who directed Kelly's Heroes. I figured he thought I could do the part. So he cast me. So when I went back to Yugoslavia, albeit to Serbia for the first 3 months of the film, a lot of the crew that I'd worked with, I had met and known, they were on the film. It was good to see them again. And this is before Tito was still alive, both years. So it was still truly Yugoslavia.
What was the country like at the time? Did it feel like it was stuck in history?
It was used as, because they had all Spain and Yugoslavia had all the World War II equipment. One of the reasons I'm sure Kelly's Heroes shot there. So it was stuck back in history that much. It was, an old socialist country. Tito was shrewd in that my first year there in Yugoslavia in 1968, the year before Kelly's Heroes, Russia had invaded Czechoslovakia, but the Yugoslavs were kind of hoping they'd come try and invade Yugoslavia. They were much more, reminded me a bit of Texas, where I grew up. It was a tough country, tough land, and they seemed to, Tito had outwitted Stalin, and that's how he was able to pull out of all the other situations. And so they thought for sure Russia might be coming. So every night the crew would meet after filming and figure out where the guns were and where they were to go to in the hills as protectors. So it was an interesting time. But they had all the old World War II planes, tanks. I've been back once since then, twice since then. Went back for Tito's funeral, or not the funeral, but the memorial in Dubrovnik. I was very upset Jimmy Carter didn't attend the funeral. He was the only world leader that didn't. Went back another time to Croatia just because it's a great vacation spot on the coast.
I think I read that Kelly's Heroes took at least 6 months to shoot. Is that true?
At least. June, July, August, September, October. I'd say closer to 6.5. Clint finally said, "I've had enough." He wanted to stop, and they stopped shortly thereafter.
With a movie shooting so long, had you ever been on a movie that took so long before that or since?
Not even close. Or since. No, I've never been on anything that long except a series. No, I have nothing to compare that to. Nothing even, certainly nothing near 6 months.
What was your experience like? What was it working on that shoot?
Varying. Like I say, in the early part of the shoot, first 3 months, we filmed in Serbia on the Danube, in an old castle called the Veridon, and it had been there since the Middle Ages, just about. And across from the Veridon Castle was a town called Novi Sad, which there was a bridge in between that had been blown up. And in Novi Sad, the beach was kind of an unspoken memorial to the Nazis had taken one of the males from the town of Novi Sad and murdered them on the beach. Serbia was much more Russian than Croatia. Then the last part of the film, we were in Croatia, an area right up near the Italian border called Istria. We filmed there till the end of the film. And it was closer to what I knew of Yugoslavia. It was, like I say, it was all Yugoslavia then. It hadn't broken up.
Did you guys shoot pretty much in order?
I'm sure not in exact order, but in terms of beginning of the film to the end of the film, yes. The beginning of the film all took place at bases or fights near Serbia, and at the end where you go into the town looking for the gold, that was all in Croatia. So in that sense, yeah, the two locations were split between beginning and end.
One of the things I love the most about Kelly's Heroes is the cast and the just incredibly diverse talent that's on that film. Just to have Clint Eastwood, you, Donald Sutherland, I mean, just so many different types of actors and acting. What was that like? And especially, what was it like working so close with Telly Savalas?
It was great. Telly was great to work with. Everybody was pretty good to work with, I'd have to say. Brian, the director, kept a good company. He ran it like a kind of a general. Yeah, and you had to on a film like that. It was just huge. We had an Italian wardrobe, German special effects, Mexican film crew, Irish stuntmen and caterer, English stuntmen, and grips. So it was a totally international crew, and everybody kind of had to speak some English, and they did. Then the cast, I knew a lot of them, and a lot of them who later became stars weren't then at the time. Clint sure was. Sutherland was coming up. He had already appeared in another big war movie. Kelly was famous. He'd been in a number of movies. But Carol O'Connor and the other people really were character actors from television or film. But none of them had become real stars the way they had been. Gavin MacLeod from Love Boat and Mary Tyler Moore and John Nichols. You know, he had achieved stardom, and I don't know that it grew anymore because of that, but he was as funny as you can imagine. Plus, it's interesting, when we first started shooting, we all lived at the Veridon Palace on the Danube, which was, like I say, an old medieval castle, and we had food was served every evening in the dining room. He kind of ran the commentary. He seemed like he was with his wife at the time, and he would comment as people entered the dining room aloud, making comments on giving Kelly most of the attention. He would be attacking Kelly. Occasionally, he didn't mess with Clint too much because Clint was, you couldn't tell whether he appreciated it or not. And Sutherland was as crazy as the character he plays. It's interesting, Donald Sutherland got very, very sick before filming started. And they put him in a hospital in Belgrade, and he got a little worse, and it really got touch and go. And I know there was some discussion about replacing him. He was ill, but he obviously got better, and that never came about. But I think he was made aware of that, and that it made him only crazier with how he did things. It was pretty stunning. I know one of the producers, there was a gambling in Serbia and on the coast, and we were very close, like I say, to the Italian border. One of the producers was broke all the time, having gambled his money away, and he was borrowing money from the caterer to gamble, and it went on like that. There were enough people that there were different groups, but like I remember on the moonwalk, the landing on the moon, we were still at the Veridin Hotel in Serbia, and there was an all-night poker game. I know Sutherland was there. Clint didn't stay very long ever. But Kelly, and I mean, it was a damn serious game of poker. And then during the night, as the night went on, at like 10:30, 11:30, you'd see some of the staff at the hotel or waiters or wandering into the room where we were playing poker in their robes and things to turn on the TV set to watch the moon landing. And it seems like everybody but the Americans were very interested in what was going on. It's only the Americans that were locked in their poker game, you know. There was a hearts tournament, the card game Hearts, that went on for months. And I won. I got a little, it was like a cup, one of the water cups you get when you go with your canteen, and taped on it was the winner of the Hearts tournament. But I was very happy to win that. That's all, just a lot of gambling and mainly cards. And people would go to casinos if we got near one, And there was a lot more opportunity in Croatia. Because, again, you run to the border and gamble in Italy.
I take it wasn't a problem to get back and forth across the border at that time.
Not at all. It was a very funny, for me funny anyway, story. I had co-written a song that was called Day After Day, More People Come to L.A. It was a calypso, of all things. And it was written, it had been a record in the Caribbean by a group called Shango. And the writer, a guy named Tommy Reynolds, who was a steel drum player, so he and I and Jerry Riopel rewrote it said day after day, more people come to L.A. Shh, don't tell anybody, the whole place slipping away. And it was about whatever, the rains and, and sure enough, it got released at the beginning of an 11-day rain, and it became the number one song in L.A. This is back in early 69. I think it went to 20th in the country. At any rate, no, it must have been, it was 69, right. And then I went to Yugoslavia to do Kelly's in June. And sometime in the latter part of July, I got a call saying Chevrolet wants to use your song as an ad. Day after day, more people buy Chevrolet or whatever. So we each got a certain amount of money, and I bought a BMW in Trieste. So it was a wonderful car, and I drove it, brought it back across the ocean, and drove it from New York to L.A. And actually, Sutherland and his buddy Sandy, I can't remember his last name. Sutherland brought back a Ferrari, and they drove from New York to L.A. Only they did it, I'm going to say something like 29 hours of straight driving through. Those are some of the things I remember. And then, the daily, just the filming of Kelly's, and some of the scenes where, there was lots of explosions throughout the film, but I was involved mainly at the beginning with the explosions, and it was interesting. And there was one scene where we're all having lunch on a hilltop, and we got strafed by some, whatever they were, German planes that came overhead. So that's done by, they bring the, down to the ground, they have little fireworks kind of things that they bring on. But in fact, that day, somebody said early on, where's all the, none of the German or English stuntmen were anywhere to be seen. And we come to find out that the German special effects man named Boom Boom Schumacher was using copper in his explosion loads, meaning pieces of copper were sailing through the air. And one of them went through my boot, through my leg, and out the other side, right above the ankle. And I leaped up, they fixed it there. Fortunately, it went all the way through and out. But, I mean, that could have been my eye or brain just as easily, you know. But that was, you know, everybody brought back some wound from that war, you know. Kelly got bayoneted in the middle of the arm. Crazy stuff happened.
You mentioned Gavin MacLeod. I know you would go on to direct him quite a few times. You directed an episode of Mary Tyler Moore and quite a few Love Boat episodes.
I knew him before the movie, too. So, well, yeah, we'd gone back. We were just kind of actors in L.A. He was partnered up with a guy named Dick Davalos. And Dick had been quite a famous actor, and in that he played James Dean's brother in East of Eden, the good brother, as it were. They were each appropriately insane, which fit their parts quite well. And Gavin did a whole 180 and became a very respectable citizen of Hollywood. So I knew him afterwards as well. My roommate at the Wherein, we each had, I thought many of us had one roommate. Mine was Harry Dean Stanton at the Wherein at the castle on the Danube. I've got some used to have some, I don't even know where they are now, photographs of Harry sitting in the window, strumming guitar, playing, singing songs.
Yeah, did you guys sing together?
I wasn't exhibiting any musical interest at the time. What we did do together, he arrived, like I say, I'd been in Yugoslavia before, and I knew the thing, and he came into the Belgrade airport, and he brought his suitcases out to the car, and one of the suitcases was filled with, there wasn't anything else in it but marijuana. And I said, man, they bury you underground. No one will ever hear from you again if they find this stuff. And he said, well, let's make sure they don't find it. And I said, yeah, we better room together.
He's so altruistic.
Yeah.
One of the other people I spoke to about this film was John Landis. Do you remember him being on set?
Sure. Johnny Milk was his nickname, because the director, Brian Hutton, had ulcers or something similar to ulcers, and he needed milk a lot or wanted it a lot. And he said, milk, Johnny Milk. And that was part of John's job, is to keep a glass of milk nearby Brian. He learned a lot about film, as well as he was a good friend of one of the production. I'm trying to remember his name. I can't remember his name, but he was involved in the production, a man that had been around a lot of international films. Moriarty, maybe, or something like that. I just can't remember.
Did the movie do anything for you? Was it a stepping stone to the next bigger role?
No, I mean, I think some people may have been, the fact that I was gotten the part may have helped my agent at the time. But in fact, the film came out and really didn't go anywhere. It just died. It was up against what came out at exactly the same time was MASH. And MASH took off. Remember, it was 1970, 69, 70. And MASH took off, and Kelly's Heroes, nothing really happened with it. And then as the years went by, it slowly became this kind of cult film, weird kind of, everybody liked it, saw it, but it was a weird life. But in its initial release, it didn't do hardly much at all, because MASH was so anti-Kelly's Heroes in terms of it was in Vietnam. It was much more irreverent and not really, but in its portrayal, it was the big hit.
It feels like there's some anti-war stuff in Kelly's Heroes, but not enough, if that makes sense.
I don't remember anybody describing it as such. It was just a World War II film, of which there were many at the time, actually. And there was no mention of anti-war at all. I mean, it was about scamming, but not so much against the war.
I wanted to know how you got involved in directing, because it was just a few years after that you started directing, especially, like I said, Mary Tyler Moore, Love American Style. You have done so many things over the years, and that was yet another facet of your career.
There's a certain point you're in LA that you hang around films and you think, gee, I'd like to try my hand at that. And I was always a believer for myself anyway. Maybe I made the wrong choice, but I'd do anything they let me do. So if somebody said, you want to direct that film? I'd say, yeah. Do you want to do the music for that film? Yeah, sure. I'd like to write this, and unless I really didn't know anything, no, I would never pretend to be a cameraman or a makeup person or those things that I could do. I had directed plays before, albeit great writers, but I had directed plays. And so it's a matter of interpreting the material and working with the actors. And I had written before, I think. Yeah, I had written actually a war movie in 1968 that went on the air in 1969 called The Ballad of Andy Crocker, which was the first Vietnam film that was ever made for American TV. Starred Lee Majors and a kid that comes back from Vietnam, and kind of the world's changed on him. And that did a lot, everybody became aware of that more than anything else. So I think it was not unnatural, because I then started doing Rockford Files, and between that and Love American Style, and I knew the guys over Mary Tyler Moore pretty well.
You brought up the Rockford Files, and I have to say that's the first time that I saw you, because I kind of grew up on the Rockford Files. And how was it playing Angel? You were such a great character.
I'd had that character without knowing that I had that character in my bullet chamber, and so we had done a series, we being Jim Garner and myself. He had a series before Rockford, the year before. Jim and Margot Kidder. Frank Pearson was the exec producer, along with Nita Rosenberg. But Frank was one of the great Hollywood writers. And so we had done this Western, and I played his sidekick that was like a guy you couldn't always trust. And I called him a desert rat, I remember at the time, which sounds worse than it means, because back in the day, I had gone to school for a couple of years at different times in Mesa, Arizona. And the school bus picked us up out in the desert, and we'd be riding with the sons and daughters of some of the desert rats, meaning they were just people that lived in the desert. It wasn't ascribing any qualities to them. But anyway, that's who he was. So when Rockford came up, they sent me the script written by Steve Cannell. I said, so it's an urban rat rather than a desert. And it just came to me. I could do Angel all day long, there was a rhythm to Angel, and I felt like I could walk that way and talk that way and not really have to work on many aspects of what's the character, what's he like, I loved him. I think probably really was crazy about the way he fit into Rockford's life and psyche. The two guys had been in prison together. So by that time I had begun to direct, and Jim and Nita Rosenberg and Steve Cannell, who produced Rockford, knew that I was trying to direct a little, and I did direct a couple of Rockfords. I only did like 5 a year, the shows, and they were doing 20 to 22 shows a year in those days. So I was in a little a fifth of them, maybe, fourth of them, not quite. And I think in some ways there was a good quality to that, in as much as you didn't get tired of Angel too quick. I don't know if every week, if maybe he'd have burned out or something, but it turned out well, and I felt good. I felt good about Angel.
I saw you just a few years ago in a film called The Discoverers. I really enjoyed that film, and especially your role in it.
Oh, well, thank you. He's a wonderful young man that wrote it and directed it. Justin, terrific guy. I knew Griffin Dunn from long ago, so we were pretty good friends, and that was nice.
Can you tell me a little bit about What the Night Can Do?
What the Night Can Do was a script that I wrote, and my youngest stepson directed, Christopher Martini. He's a filmmaker out of New York, and then director, editor, writer. And it was shot in West Virginia in about 12 days. They may have ended up being 14 days with the pickups and everything. It was shot down and dirty. The young lady in it was, at 12 years old at the time, was a young actress from Canada, and she's now a grown young lady and doing well, I'm told. She had a series on, I think it was Netflix.
Is that Mercedes Mason?
No, Mercedes is she's in that the one about the zombies, but the spin-off from the original.
Fear of the Walking Dead.
Yeah, Mercedes is in that. No, this young lady's name is Peyton. She's terrific. Well, all the actors are. And my oldest boy, Max Mardini, he was married to, in the film, to Mercedes. He played the girl's father. So it was pretty much a family kind of film to some degree. It was fun. It was, when you're making film that fast and don't have much time, if any time, it's a lot of pressure. It's hard work, especially for the director, You have to move on, at a certain point. And so there's a lot of scenes that I'm sure he would have loved to have shot some more, been able to do more takes, rehearsals, whatever. But anyway, it was a good experience.
I just caught you in one that I had wanted to see for years, but was unable to find, and finally just bought it on DVD. The Big Bus. What a wonderfully odd picture that is.
Crazy, crazy picture. Wonderfully written by two good friends of mine, one especially good friend of mine named Fred Freeman and Larry Cohen. They were very good. Some of the best in terms of that type of material, truly offbeat material. They were the best. Julia Phillips produced it. It was crazy. Nutty crazy. I remember Jose Ferrar, he was up in that Iron Lung one day. It was Christmas Eve day, I think. And he said, you live out west on Sunset. And I said, yeah. He said, would you take this package by this house? So I said, sure. So he gave me this package. I drove and I'm going up. I mean, this must be, it was a beautiful area, Sure enough, a pretty big size mansion. I rang the doorbell and it's Rosemary Clooney. They had been married. Now I put it together and it was like a belated, or not belated, but it was a Christmas gift delivered by a stranger, to her. I'll never forget. That was so weird.
But he was fun to work with. And Sally Kellerman and Richard Mulligan were two of my close friends. And Sally, I thought, was superb in that film, as was Stockard Channing. Great cast. And the concept worked in that era's time because there were those films about the building with the atom bomb in the middle of it. You know, here's this bus, and it was very funny. I was tickled to be in it.
I'm surprised that it came out so many years before Airplane.
It was a little more tongue-in-cheek, and I think it may have been just a little bit too smart for itself, you know. When you consider the extent of the success of Airplane, Big Bus should have been in that area anyway, and it was received well, but not on that level, you know. And never really has been. It's kind of an afterthought for a lot of people.
Mr. Margolin, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a pleasure talking with you.
I'm glad. Thank you for calling and asking and being patient about it.
I grew up with you in my living room every week. If it wasn't the Mary Tyler Moore Show, it was the Love Boat.
But that was really a gift, I have to tell you, because just after Mary ended, Patty and I talked about it. I said, you know, because whenever there was a hiatus, we had a nightclub act, or we were doing a play someplace. It was wonderful. That fulfillment was terrific. People want to see you. When they see you on television, they want to see you in person. So it was great. And so when it ended, I said, why don't we put our act together again and just concentrate on that? That's enough television. She said, I think that's a good idea. There were two different offers after the Mary Tyler Moore Show. One was there was an hour show about the Depression that took place in Pittsburgh. I was going to be the father. And there wasn't a snicker. There was nothing to laugh at. It was like, you see that show, you commit Harry Carey, you're so depressed. I said, no, thanks. I don't think I want to do that. Then they sent another pilot with Jeff Bridges, who I had worked with before, and I knew his whole family. I used to do plays with his brother, Bo, and I gave Jeff his first job years ago. I had written and directed a play at Theater West, you know, where Carol was too, and he was doing the same thing. I wrote a play, and I had people planted in the audience. And so this one girl from the theater group, I said, I would love to have you do that. She said, well, I would love to do it. He said, I have a boyfriend named Jeff Bridges. I said, oh, I've heard of him. And she said, could he come and be one of the audience too and participate and throw the paper? I said, sure he can. So that's how I met Jeff, and then I met the mother and everything. Oh, I knew that whole family so well. I sound like an old guy repeating his life. I'm sorry. Anyway, that was another thing, but that was like Murray Slaughter in a cowboy suit. I said, I don't think I want to do that. And finally, my agent calls, and Patty and I get in because I was going to put our act together again. The agent calls, says, I got an offer from Aaron Spelling. It's very good. I said, oh, yeah, what's the show? It's called The Love Boat. I said, oh, that sounds so familiar. I said, have you read it? He says, yeah. I said, what do you think about it? He says, I think it sucks. He says, you want to read it? I said, sure, I want to read it. He said, I'll send it to you. I said, okay, but do it fast because I'm going down. We had a little place in Palm Springs in the Mary Tyler Moore days. I said, I'm going down there for the weekend. I could read it. So he got it to me, and we got it, and Patty read The Love Boat first. And she said, oh, Gavin, I just read this show, and you're going to be the captain. Wow. And I said, I better read this thing. And well, it was like Love American style. I did the last one of those before that was canceled. But there was a story there about an old Jewish guy, eventually Phil Silvers played it, who feels like he's going to die, but there's no more room in the cemetery in Astoria.
And so he says, I want to go on this ship. I can die on this ship and they can throw me overboard. So that'll be that. So that was his plan. So he gets on this ship and he meets this girl who was Audra Lindley, who was Jimmy Whitmore's wife in real life. They fall for each other. And it's a beautiful love story. And then you have the other funny stuff going on. But this is this story that got me. And so they're making plans. And before they get back, she goes over to his room to see him, to get him. And he's passed away. Well, that tugged at my heart a bit. I said, if I can do a really broad comedy, a subtle comedy, and this kind of a thing. So Aaron Spelling had a meeting. He says, I promise you we will always have one of these serious stories in this. We will always, because I thought I need to have happy endings. He says, happy endings. And that's what they tried to do with The Love Boat. And he said, we'll try to get the biggest stars available. Well, that's what they did. The critics hated us. Oh, they thought it was mindless television. I'll never forget when we did one of my favorite shows was The Love Boat Follies with, if you're Ethel Merman, Carol Channing, Della Reese, Ann Miller, Cab Calloway, and Van Johnson. You're in actors' heaven. Come on with these people. And so the reviewer hated it and then said when MacLeod finished his number, he said they should have torpedoed the ship. Well, I thought that was the funniest line at all because when we got a star on Hollywood Boulevard about 3 years ago, I said, I'll never forget that one. I'm so glad they didn't torpedo the ship. It was a show for the people, and I think that's what a lot of television, they want to reach as many as they can. They get more money when they get a bigger audience, and they'll pay more money for the advertising. And so I was very able to do that, and I was very grateful for that show because we were all over the world. It was just really something special. I always keep thinking they called it mindless television, so that must be what the populace is. But I think people want to see things that help them escape, and people want to see people better off than they are, and people cruised vicariously with a lot of these characters. And as a result, cruise lines just exploded. When we started that, Princess had 2 little ships. And until recently, we just got rid of one of them. Because they got a great big one, and they just made the biggest Enchanted Princess. But that won't be coming out. None of them are coming out for a while, but they still have to keep them going so they don't rot. And nobody's going, and they don't feel safe. But I think once it starts in again, they've been working on it. The cruise industry has lost billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's nice to have had all that, but it's also nice to have had Brian Hutton in my life because he was very, very special. And even at that time, he had his ulcer because he was drinking his milk and his stuff in the daytime. I guess the milk was supposed to be helping him. I don't know.
I am so curious about how you got the role, and I want to kind of dive into your experience being over there in Yugoslavia. But first, please tell me how you got the role.
My first Broadway play was A Hatful of Rain. I was the first replacement. I was the only one in it that wasn't in the actor's studio. So I was in it for months in New York, and McQueen came in. That was his second Broadway thing. Ben Gazzara had created it. Then he went away to do a movie from the play called And There's a Man, which became a movie called The Strange One, with all the actor studio guys, and Peter Mark Richmond was in it also. But anyway, so Steve took over because Shelley Winters was leaving the play. Vivian Blaine was coming in. And so they needed someone who kind of fit with Vivian Blaine, and Steve belonged to the studio. And anyway, I read with a lot of actors, George Peppard and all of them. But Steve got it, and Steve was doing it. And you know what happened to Steve McQueen as a result. Wow, that was the beginning. I'm talking like this, and it sounds like I'm an old person, and I guess I am. So I was with that for years, and I was on the road with it, played California, Hollywood, got great reviews, got an offer for a movie, but I wouldn't leave the play, and I went back to New York, and I told my wife, I said, I think I got some action on the West Coast. We knew one person. They called the agent out there, and before you know it, I was doing A Hatful of Rain on the West Coast. They were just about to open, and they didn't like the guy that was playing Mother. Well, I had understudied that, and I knew it upside down. So I went down and I saw them. They gave me a reading, and they said, "You want to open Tuesday?" I said, "Sure." The bottom line was the leading character in that play was played by Brian Hutton, and that was the first time I met him. Jocelyn Brando was his wife, had wonderful actors, Robert Blake, and a lot of people. Anyway, we did all that. That was in 1957. In 1960, Brian calls me and said, "Gavin, I have done Operation Petticoat and a lot of movies in that interim." And he says, "I've got this play I want you and Robert Blake to do." I said, "What's it called?" He says, "The Connection." The Connection. I said, "That's Jack Gelber's play. They're doing it at the American Theater back in New York, the Living Theater." He said, "Yeah." I said, "Brian, I don't want to do it. All I read about it, it's all improvisation. I don't want to do a whole evening of improvisation." He says, No, there's a script. Let me bring it to you." So he brought me the script. I read it, and wow, it blew me away. And so we proceeded with that. My first boy was just about to be born. He was just born, actually. So we opened the play, and all of a sudden, Brian, who was an actor before this, becomes a very desirable director. James Wong Howe, this great photographer, he came 4 times. Blake Edwards came. I had done things with him. He came with Peter Gunn and his wife, Hank Mancini. Everybody would come. It was the show to see in town. So Brian was really getting recognized as a director for the first time. Al Ruddy was producing for the first. He was selling shoes until this play, and he produced the play. And as you know, his first thing was The Godfather, the movie for The Godfather he produced, and he's still around. Brian went from there, and he did another series at Universal, and before you knew it, I got a call. And Brian said, "This is a long story on how I got the part." He said, "Gavin, I got a great part for you in this movie with Clint Eastwood." I said, "Oh, okay, let me see it." And so he sent me the script, and I said, "Oh, yeah, when do we go?" And that's how that happened, is because I knew Brian. We had worked together as actors, and we worked together as a director-actor. And I just love that guy. He was wonderful. It was one of my favorite people of all time. That's how I got the part.
He immediately said, "You'd be great for Moriarty."
Oh, he just sent it to me. He says, "I want you to play this." Yeah. Because he knows the kind of stuff I did. I would always take a lot of risks playing characters in the early days. You know, that's what the character Leach was in the play, The Connection. I mean, a guy had a boil on his neck. He was just, I would think you might call him a bisexual guy. He was anti-sex. He was just, the reviews were, the people, this is the first time a person used the F word in a play. And Robert Blake, we each had big monologues. I opened with a 40-minute monologue. Then each actor had their own monologue. And the second act, Robert had his monologue. And every once in a while, he would get upset and he would use the F word. Well, people would hear it and start screaming and things like that. This was 1960. They had cops come, and the police would be there every night waiting for, if he said the F word, if they were there, they were going to close us down. So it got a lot of notoriety in those days because it was groundbreaking as a result. And I got so much work I worked for Paul Henreid so many times when he was directing as a result of that particular play. To this day, I went to do a play. I did a lot of plays for John Houseman at UCLA. That's where I met Carol O'Connor. There was publicity lady for a play. I forget which one it was. The Evening of the Absurd, I think, Ionesco, etc. And she said, publicity lady says, I met her. She says, "I don't want to get close to you." I said, "Why not?" She says, "I saw you in The Connection." "Oh, I can't stand you." I said, "I'm just an actor. Well, for heaven's sakes, it's not me." But anyway, it was that kind of a thing. And Brian was getting credit for all that because he loved actors who risked, and I loved to risk playing characters. That was it. And that's why he just called me. He knew I was going to do something with Moriarty. And I asked him, "Who's going to play Oddball?" "Yeah, who's going to play?" He said, "Donald Sutherland." I said, "Oh, wow, this will be something else."
Had you worked in Yugoslavia or Europe before that?
No. I had done the Sand Pebbles before that with Steve McQueen. We were in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and back at the studio. And that's where I met Shep Sanders, who was also part of Oddball's crew. And Shep lived down here where I live in the Coachella Valley down here in the Palm Springs area. He left us about 3 years ago. I went to his funeral. He was a great guy. He played Turk.
How was it working in Yugoslavia under Tito?
It was challenging and wonderful and exciting. All these guys and very few women. My wife came over for a short time, I remember. Tom Troop was there, one of the best actors of all time, and his wife is Carol Cook. And she was there a lot for the whole time. And she was, I don't know if you know her, but she was Lucille Ball's protege. And she was the first one to do Hello, Dolly outside of Carol Channing. She did it in Australia for about 6 or 7 years. When Tommy Troop, he was with Telly's group, and then I was with Oddball's group. We didn't work at the same time frequently, and we weren't working. And so when he was working and I wasn't, his wife and I would walk into town. I hang out with her because she was a showgirl. And we walked into town, and they all thought she was Zsa Zsa Gabor. And so she played it up. She's a funny, funny lady, and she played it up. So I love being with Carol, and I met some wonderful people. So anyway, the first location was in Novi Sad, and we had rooms and a great big, when I went over there, I said, I'm going to have fun with the guys going over. Well, apparently, I went over by myself. I flew over. Somebody met me and brought me up to this big, old, frightening-looking kind of hotel in Novi Sad, way up there. And Len Lesser was there, and Len Lesser and I were in the same theater group, and he was playing a character, and so he and I shared the same mini suite together, as long as that he didn't stay very long. He had just that location to do, and he was great. And that's where I met the guys in the show who were still there, who were there before me. Yeah, we became fast friends, and we all in the same boat, the same tank, so to speak. And the location was interesting. I had never experienced anything like that, though I had been in the Orient, and then years later, when I did The Love Boat, we were all over the world. But this place. It was new and different, and it was so beautiful. One of the scary things, not scary, but one of the things that I thought was very emotionally disturbing is that place we stayed in is where Hitler took it over during the Second World War. I remember there was a big wall with all flowers planted in front of the wall, and I said, isn't that beautiful? Look at those flowers. Look how And somebody said, you know why they're there? I said, no. And he said, because they represent all the people that have been killed against that wall. Hitler just lined them up and shot them down there. I said, oh, my God. And then we were up high, and he said, and then they took him to the other side and pushed them over, and they went into the Blue Danube, which was black. So it had that kind of memories that were very negative and disturbing, to tell you the truth. But Marshal Tito was alive when we were there shooting, and he had all those Second World tanks and things that we could use. And we had to get his approval for many, many different things. I remember one incident when we were in the second location. We were at a resort, and we were into one of those little towns there shooting, and it was a big scene in the movie with the tanks, and we all entered this one town, and you see the townspeople waving and so forth. And one of those people was a little old man, and he waved and waved, and it was over. Brian came running over to me. He said, my God, he said, the man died. I said, what? He said, he got scared, had a heart attack, and died. I said, oh, my God, what are you going to do? He said, this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to bury him. His wife came running to us and said, look, please, please, do me a favor, bury him yourself. Build a coffin, put him in, and just don't tell anybody, because if the state finds out that he died, they'll take my house away from me. And so that was a kind of a memory I have of that entrance in that big, when the tanks came in and all the people and all that. That was the second location. I can't remember the name of it, and I should, because we spent most of the time shooting there. What I forgot to tell you, which was kind of fun, is that
I've heard that the shoot went on for like 6 months. How long were you over there?
Oh, it seemed like a long time. It was it was months and months and months. It was a very interesting location because it was very different than the location with Steve and Robert Wise and the Sand Pebbles. But that was the Orient, and it was a much more controlled atmosphere. Our first assistant on this big picture was John Choulet, because he was Yugoslavian. And John Choulet was the first assistant on the Dick Van Dyke Show years before. And so we finally come home from doing Kelly's Heroes. I start rehearsing. I'm doing Carousel, playing Jigger in Carousel. And I get a call from my agent. The bottom line is the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And it turns out the first assistant on the Mary Tyler Moore Show is John Choulet. I was with him in Yugoslavia for all those months, and he's the nicest guy. He's passed now. They finally gave him one of our Mary Tyler Moore shows to direct, and it was one of the best shows I think we ever did. It was a show called Not a Christmas Show, and it was very, very funny, and John did a great job. But I met him first on Dick Van Dyke, and then now in Kelly's Heroes. He had a big job, second units and everything else. And he did a great job. And so that's how it rekindled us when we worked together on that. And then we did have, I don't know if anybody told you about the special effects man. Brian used to tell me, he said, man, he loves to blow things up. And he loved even blowing anything up. And those poor Yugoslavian actors, well, they were extras. They would blow them up in one scene, and then 2 hours later, they'd be dressed and walking, marching, and so forth. You know, it was just a very interesting kind of location. Tom Troop was wonderful. He got killed. The Nazis killed him in the minefield. And Dick Davalos, he was, if I remember him, he played James Dean's brother in East of Eden, and he did a lot of Broadway stuff. But Davalos, he was the guy in the tower near the end. He was one, and Jerry O'Loughlin, my friend he and I had done a Hawaii 5-0 together, and now he comes over there to shoot this character, and he was so wonderful, and I was shocked when they released the movie because he wasn't in it. He was replaced by Kelly's brother, George. I don't know what happened there. Nobody ever told me. I didn't ask. I was just very disappointed. Harry Dean Stanton was great. He had his guitar and a guy named playing cowboy with him. And Carol O'Connor was just a bright force in that movie. And Carol and I had been friends. We had done plays for John Houseman at UCLA together. We belonged to Theater West. We used to write plays at the same time. And I knew Nancy well and his little boy Hugh. Anyway, so Carol. But then there was Don Rickles. Barbara was with him. And he said, I thought he was so wonderful in that movie. Telly had his whole group of guys around him for support. It was amazing to see. I had never seen anything quite like that before. It was like he was a king, and he had wonderful actors surrounding him that would just do his bidding and all. And George was one. And I love George. That's what I remember. Dick Balduzzi was in that too. I met Dick on that shot, and I got a chance I got him on the Mary Tyler Moore Show a couple of years later. We did a funny thing happen on the way to the Forum together. So I don't know if he's with us now. I lose track of these people. This was a long time ago.
I think he just passed last year.
He did, huh? He was very funny. He got very funny when I was doing The Love Boat. And I used to see him, go to see his apartment and all this stuff. And we did have that one show together. And after we did The Love Boat, I was shooting it, and he came to see me at my trailer. He said, look, I hear there's a part of an Italian chef coming up. I said, yeah, they want Al Molinaro. He said, well, I want to play that. I said, Dick, they just want names here. That's what they do. They go for names, and Al is so well known. And he said, look, I want you to get me that part. And he slammed out of the door, and he left my trailer, and I haven't seen him since. That was so sad to me because we used to hang out. So his daughter was very talented. I don't know what's happened there. So Clint is still here. I'm still here. Sutherland is still here. I see him doing things all the time.
Yeah, what was he like to work with?
Oh, he was fabulous because he's nothing like Oddball. He's fabulous. As a matter of fact, you know what? After he first met me, he had a Cockney guy, I can't remember his name, who was his assistant. He said, hey, let's get out of town. I said, well, where are we going to go? We're in Yugoslavia. He said, we can take a boat across and we'll go to Italy and we'll have dinner there and come back. And he said, it'll break this whole thing up. I said, well, do we need permission? He said, just come with me. And so we got on this boat and it just skimmed along. There was other people on the boat too. It was one of those ferry kind of boats, only smaller, skimmed along. And we got out, and when I went to this Italian restaurant, yeah, he was treating me, so it was nice. I think he didn't want to get to know me a little bit. And I remember it was the first time in my life I ever saw a man peel an orange and not lose any of the whole orange. The Italian guy was just peeling it in front of us when we were eating. But I got a chance to know him a little bit. He was wonderful to work with, let's face it, And he was so good as the oddball. Some of the critics didn't like his whole group. He said it was very unreal and so forth, but it made a good movie.
You mentioned Don Rickles, and I'm just curious, was he always on? Was he always Don Rickles?
No. He only became Don Rickles. When he and I were just talking by ourselves, he was as real as they come. He just had that, if another person entered the room, he was on. He's not the only one. Uncle Milty was like that, too. A lot of comics were like that. There's something happens to them. It's just, Don was absolutely wonderful to talk to. He talked about his drinking. I was drinking quite a bit on that set. I haven't had a drink in 40-something, almost 50 years since the Mary Tyler Moore show. But I was drinking on that location. What are you going to do? I mean, half the people were on drugs, and I had never done that. Shep once told me how to do something, and I tried. I said, well, it didn't make me sleep. I don't need that. Clint was there with his first wife. And the two kids, yeah, and it was small, because it was way back then. And look what's happened to him. And wow, he's become this big, wonderful film director. It was a fun location, and the food was great. It was a whole different system. We even found out that they had certain, females assigned to different hotels that would work the hotels for the visitors. So they had a lot of that going on. But the natives, the people themselves, were just really nice people. Really, really nice people. A lot of Catholics, yes. Brian Hutton was so great. I'm so glad. He also asked me to do another one, which I couldn't. I was shooting The Love Boat. Tom Selleck did another one. Another big movie for MGM. And I couldn't do it because I said, I can't get out of this series. I mean, I'd love to be with you, but I'm committed. And Jack Weston did it. But I love Brian Hutton. I just loved him. And, he never finished high school. He was from Brooklyn. It's just what you can do if you have a strong will and a great wife. Vicky was wonderful. But it was a good group, a great group of actors. Harry Dean, I know he died last year or the year before. Down here, we don't get the Hollywood news. It's sad because people have passed away. The only time I get the Hollywood Reporter, and the first thing I look up is births and deaths.
I talked with Stuart Margolin over the weekend, and then I spoke with John Landis a couple weeks ago.
Oh, yeah, he became a big director. Oh, I thought he was a pain in the ass on our show. Oh, he's just an aggressive pain in the ass. I thought he was a young kid just out of college, thought he knew everything. I hate to be so realistic. And then he was directing the show that Vic Morrow died on.
Right, yeah, the Twilight Zone movie.
Oh, that's terrible, but I'm so happy that he's been successful. Look. You ever run into a college kid who hasn't done very much but has all the answers, and that's what he was kind of like. I don't mean to say negative things about anybody, but I'm very happy he's successful. That's very nice.
Yeah, Stuart was telling me that he called him Johnny Milk because he would go and get Brian Hutton's milk to
get him his milk.
Ulcer.
Get him his milk. Stuart was great in this. Stuart's great in everything he does. I've worked with Stuart a lot in my career. He was a wonderful actor, a wonderful director. He was terrific. I've seen him play a lot of diverse characters. Kelly's Heroes, people love that show. I mean, I made it so long ago, and just to think, I mean, just yesterday there were 5 photographs of that show. 5 different people sending pictures. There's some good pictures of Moriarty they send all kinds of things. This one was with Donald and Shep and I, and a lot by myself. But people are picking up on these things that they haven't seen before. But I want to say it was a wonderful location. It was a great experience to live out of this country and see what the other world is like. I'm glad I did it when I was young because I couldn't handle it today.
Mr. MacLeod, thank you so much for your time. This was great talking with you.
Well, Mike, I've enjoyed this very much. I got off direction a few times, but that's human nature, I guess.
All right, we are back, and we are talking about Kelly's Heroes. And I was reading the Landis makes mention of what is it called, like Retro Cinema magazine. I was reading about that, and one of the authors was like, "Oh yeah, this is kind of like Three Kings," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I can barely remember Three Kings, but I guess it is like a heist movie and a war movie combined." And I was trying to think of other heist war movies, and it sounds like they're out there, but just nothing really was like screaming at me like, yes, of course, we're going to use the spoils of war and do a heist while we're in the middle of this.
Operation Petticoat, I wouldn't say it's a heist movie, but it's sort of similarly a movie about these naval officers during World War II who are similarly kind of, I think they're more inept, certainly in Operation Petticoat, but they're similarly unfocused. They don't really know why they're there or what they're doing. And they don't exactly steal their submarine, but they kind of do. Like, they paint it pink, and they basically live to party, mostly thanks to Tony Curtis's character. It's not a heist movie exactly, but it is pretty similar, where they become heroes totally in an accidental way that involves a lot of women's lingerie. I mean, Where Eagles Dare does kind of feel like a heist movie, even though it's not.
It's been so long since I've seen that one. I know that I've seen it, and then it was one of those where I was going through like a Clint Eastwood period, and so I was like, okay, is that the one where they climb the mountain? No, that's the Eiger Sanction. So it's like I always mix up some of those movies from around that period.
Yeah, it's Clint Eastwood and Richard Burton, and there is like a mountain chateau storming sequence. So the way that like really suspenseful scene is set up, it feels like a heist. Like it goes through that kind of heist montage sequence that so many of those movies have.
Yeah, I was reminded of James Bond movies a little bit with that one too, like the espionage element of it, as much as any kind of war movie kind of element.
And I know you mentioned MASH earlier. I didn't realize that this came out because of some of the delays and because of how long it took them to shoot it, that this ended up coming out right around the same time as MASH, which is interesting that there are the parallels of kind of having the war movie standing in, this, like you said, MASH is Korean War, but it's really seems very much like it's the Vietnam War, and then having this is World War II, but it feels like the Vietnam War, and then having Donald Sutherland. So Sutherland's competing against himself in the box office, which I guess either way he wins.
No offense to Brian Hutton, but he can't really compete with Robert Altman.
When it comes to MASH, I think of that as it is a war movie in a sense because it's dealing with the Korean War kind of setting, but I think of that as much as a predecessor to like those kind of like slobs versus snobs kind of comedies that come later. Like it's very much about, these characters blowing off steam by getting into prankish behavior and sexual situations. So I think the reason it became such a huge smash was because it tapped into that audience that would support films like Caddyshack as much as it, is tapping into anti-war sentiment. I think it's, that's going to get you some people. But I think the reason it was a blockbuster to the point where it set up Altman for a decade worth of films and had a TV show, I think that's partly because the comedy was risque for the time in a way that, hadn't been seen before. It's like one of the first films to have fuck in the dialogue. Like it has like all these things that were envelope pushing. And I guess, even something like Patton would have had stronger language than people were used to at the time, because 1970 is like so early into that R rating, that fall of the production code. But yeah, MASH being kind of put in the same ballpark as Catch-22 and Patton and Kelly's Heroes, it feels like it has some unfair advantages because it doesn't have any battle things. It feels more realistic because it's dealing with the wounds of the people in battle. Like it's dealing with the reality of the horror of war, but it also doesn't have to have, I think maybe Kelly's Heroes has like maybe one too many extended battle sequences. MASH doesn't have anything to do with that. It's like, just hijinks. And so it feels like a lighter film, even though it has sadder sequences.
I don't know if you did this on purpose, but at the beginning of when you were talking, you said that MASH was a smash. And I just want to give you a gold star for that one.
I work in marketing in my daytime.
No, but I think you're totally right about why MASH was so much more popular. And my grandfather was in a MASH unit in Korea, and I think in some ways didn't like the film because of that kind of irreverent comedy that I think he felt was a little disrespectful. But he also, like, he and I used to watch the TV show together, and he would tell me, like, when we would sit and watch it, he would tell me, like, how accurate it was. And that so much of it, especially if you were in a medical unit, was you weren't going out and participating in battle. You were just dealing with the aftermath in a really horrible way that I think made people have to rely on those kinds of distracting situations, like, hijinks and sexual relationships, as a way to kind of alleviate the stress of just being stuck there day in and day out.
MASH also, it's like those Howard Hawks movies, about like guys that were pros, like, and they could be irreverent and they could be hung up on, romantic shenanigans. But, when it came down to like actually doing the job, they can do the job. Like they're good at what they do as surgeons. I think you look at Kelly's Heroes and they're good soldiers, but they're less, they're less committed to it, what their goal is than the characters in MASH. Like they might be equally irreverent, but the people in MASH are still doing what they're supposed to do. And Kelly's Heroes, I mean, they're shirking their duties. And so even if they can get through their adventure with like a minimum of casualties, it's still, they're not like the good guys in the way that like a Hawks, group of guys would have been.
They're presented like a family. As much as they make fun of each other and pull these pranks on each other, they are always there to support one another and to take care of one another in a, real physical sense. Whereas in Kelly's Heroes, everybody's ready to desert whatever their mission is as soon as they hear about this bank heist.
Yeah, and you're right as far as it being a proto-Slavs versus snobs kind of thing, especially when you get to the end, and I think some people forget about this, with the football game, that very protracted scene of the football game. And that is totally like, we've got a ringer. Oh, they've got a ringer as well. Actually, they've got more than one ringer. And yeah, we're going to do what we need to do. I mean, them using like the drugs and knocking out the biggest player and stuff. I mean, it is very, very like, you can see Gutenberg from Police Academy doing something exactly the same.
Talking about that football game, Martin Scorsese said it was the only football game he ever understood.
He's not alone.
I think there's that one and maybe The Longest Yard, and that's about it for me.
There are some smaller budget World War II movies that deal with these like concentration camp and POW camp games. Soccer games between soldiers and Nazis, and it's like it's all based on stuff
Victory.
Yes, it's all based on stuff that really happened, but you're also just like, why would someone make a film out of this? Like, what is this? Is this supposed to be like a sad war drama? Is this a sports movie? What the hell's happening here? And I do think with World War II in particular, there are a lot of those movies that, especially into the 70s, like into the late 60s and 70s, so many World War II movies had already been made. And still, I think you could make movies about World War II until the end of humanity and not cover every single story. But it just, some of them blend genres in the weirdest ways. And Kelly's Heroes is definitely up there.
Yeah, when you talk about sad war movies blended with like playing sports with Nazis, I'm thinking like Soccer 120 Days of Sodom could have been a really good blending of those tropes, but we'll never see it.
They got that beautiful courtyard out there. They could do all kinds of stuff.
That's true. You see their knees, they can kick.
There's got to be a scene where it's like, you can't touch pigskin like that.
All right, we're going to take another break and play a preview for next week's show.
いいえ、あんたは生き証人ですよ。あんたの話を誰だって嘘だと言えないですよ。寺島さん、お願いします。お願いしますよ。
カモン！逃亡者の兵隊は片っ端からぶった切れ！軍法が許しはない！
戦争が終わってる中に。バカなそんな。父ちゃんが一度食ったなんて。バカくせえ。嘘だよね、父ちゃん。みんな嘘ついてるだよね。
That's right. We'll be back next week with a trip to the Pacific Theater with Kinji Fukasaku's Under the Flag of the Rising Sun. Until then, I want to thank this week's co-hosts, Sam and Bill. So, Bill, what has been happening with you, sir?
The last thing that I worked on that came out was a new release of the film Jeremy from Fun City Editions for all of the Kelly's Heroes, Robbie Benson crossover audience that this episode will have. I did the booklet essay for that release, and actually a few people involved in it have been on projection booths like Chris O'Neill, Kat Ellinger, and Mike McPadden. And Since I mentioned Mike McPadden, the last thing I did was I recorded a podcast that's coming out probably around the same time as this with Heather Drain. One of Mike's last projects that never came out while he was around was Mondo Midnight Movies, which is the show he was going to do with Heather Drain. And so we just did an episode together on Alex Cox's Straight to Hell, which has Mike's interview with Alex Cox. And I don't know if that is dropping before or after this episode, but I don't know. It's pretty great. I mean, and people listen to Projection Booth know Heather Drain and probably know Mike McPadden as well. And so if you want to hear Mike and Alex Cox talk, it's pretty great. But that's been a work on lately that I can talk about. And then you can also hear my old supporting characters episodes at www.nowplayingnetwork.net. But yeah, that's what I'm working on.
And Sam, what's happening in your world?
Super busy as always. And as always, every time you ask me at the end of episodes, I honestly can't remember what has been announced and what I'm allowed to talk about and what I'm not. So I will just say, since we're talking about World War II movies, I have a book called The Legacy of World War II in European Art House Cinema coming out later this spring from McFarlane Books, and you can pre-order it from their website.
Thanks again, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Please head on over to the website, projectionboothpodcast.com, where you can find out more about today's episode. You'll also find a link over to Patreon, where you can make a donation to the show. Every donation we get helps the Projection Booth take over the world.
Friends all tried to warn me, but I held my head up high. All the time they warned me, but I only passed them by. They all tried to tell me, but I guess I didn't care. I turned my back and left them standing there. All the burning bridges that have fallen after me, all the lonely feelings and the burning memories, everyone I left behind each time I closed the door, burning bridges lost forevermore. Joey tried to help me find a job a while ago. When I finally got it, I didn't want to go. The party Mary gave for me when I just walked away. Now there's nothing left for me to say. All the burning bridges that have fallen after me, all the lonely feelings and the burning memories, everyone I left behind each time I closed the door, burning bridges lost forevermore. Years have passed and I keep thinking what a fool I've been. I look back into the past and think of way back then. I know that I've lost everything I thought that I could win. I guess I should have listened to my friends. All the burning bridges that have fallen after me, all the lonely feelings and burning memories, everyone I left behind each time I closed the door, burning bridges lost forevermore. My name's Mike D, and I can do that Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
My style's wild, and you know that it's still.
Yeah.
Might keep all 5 boroughs in stitches.
You're right, man.
If you enjoy this show and want more people to know about it, head on over to iTunes, leave a comment, and rate it 5 stars. Make sure you like and share us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Just search for Christopher Media. Thank you in advance for supporting Christopher Media by clicking on the PayPal button and by clicking through to all the sponsors who support ChristopherMedia.net. Most importantly, we would like to take the time to extend an extra special thanks to you. Christopher Media could not exist without your support. Thank you for visiting ChristopherMedia.net, and thank you for listening. Christopher Media. Let's make some noise.
That's my other dog imitation.